Advisory except for Andrew Pfaff. Okay, so let me read the usual stuff. Pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12th, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the Open Meeting Law, General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 18, and the Governor's March 15th, 2020 order imposing strict limitations on the number of people that may gather in one place, this meeting of the Southborough Advisory Committee will be conducted via remote participation to the greatest extent possible. Specific information in the general guidelines for remote participation by members of the public and or parties with a right and or requirement to attend this meeting can be found on the town of Southborough's website at www.southboroughtown.com. For this meeting, members of the public who wish to watch or participate in the meeting may do so in the following manner: by finding the meeting at www.southboroughtown.com/remote meetings. No in-person attendance of members of the public will be permitted, but every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings in real time via technological means. In the event that we are unable to do so, despite efforts, we will post on Southborough's website an audio or video recording, transcript, or other comprehensive record of proceedings as soon as possible after the meeting. All right. Okay, so we're going to jump right into Mr. Butler's presentation on solid waste. He's already done this presentation at least twice, one in front of Capital Planning Committee, who he was working with directly, and then last night in front of the Board of Selectmen. So he is well practiced at this. John. Hi, John. So I know everybody knows Mr. Butler. I would introduce him even more fuller, but we all know John Butler. We know his background. We know how long he has worked on various town committees, especially advisory. So with no more fanfare, I'm going to turn over to him.
So what can you, my image is not appearing with my name. Are you seeing me?
No.
So why not?
I don't know. I don't see.
You need to make them co-host.
Here we go. Now we are. There we've got that. Now I need to share screen, right?
Yes.
I see. Okay, share screen. I'm going to try that now. And I'm going to try isolating it on the PowerPoint thing.
Okay, now I may need to promote you to a, no, there he is. Never mind.
We set? Hello, everyone.
Yep.
All right, should I start? Are we ready?
I think so.
Okay, so essentially, this is a presentation that was given to capital budget a couple of weeks ago. And it had some additions last night for the Board of Selectmen, and it's had one small addition based on a question that came from them last night. So without further ado, I'll jump into it. Are we working here? Okay. This is an overview, and there are a couple of different things which we might do later. We'll talk about those at the end. I'm going to talk about what the context is for the whole solid waste disposal situation, look at Southborough Operations specifically. Then we'll jump into a comparison of principally four comparable towns, although a few others will get mentioned along the way. Then we will review all the choices that people have talked about or things people have talked about changing here in Southborough, but see what the considerations might be with regard to that, and then draw some conclusions. And then I've tacked on to the end of this some suggestions for going forward with respect to planning for the Wheelabrator contract renewal, which is out about 5-6 years. Okay. In the US, most solid waste, which is the stuff that goes in the big hopper, it goes to landfills, but in Massachusetts, it goes mostly, or it goes significantly to Massachusetts-based waste to energy or incineration plants that produce electricity. There are a few landfills still operating, and some of it goes by train to out-of-state landfills. Recycling nationwide takes about 1/3 of solid waste. And recycling has been plagued with problems since the Chinese stopped taking commingled a couple of years ago. No one has a solution. Prices have gone skyrocketing. One should expect continued instability in that area for a variety of reasons, but basically because the markets for recyclables are motivated from regulation rather than by conventional economics. All right. What's the situation more locally? Massachusetts statute specifies that the Board of Health has responsibility for solid waste oversight. Our Board of Health, however, has been inactive for about 30 years. It has the capacity to set standards and to license haulers. It is active in quite a few towns, but not currently active here. In the larger picture, Mass Department of Environmental Protection sets the rules for disposal. We just basically have to take their rules. The interest in the larger picture is mostly because we assume that in the end, they're affected by the facts that appear in the marketplace. All right, what's our current situation? We have a mixed town and private model, about 50-50 split if you measure the town by who pays what into the levy. The town operates a transfer station, which is available to residents only, and it's mostly funded by a user fee, about 80%. We don't use a pay-as-you-throw system. And then the private world of trash collection here in Southborough consists of residential curbside. About 30% of residences take private curbside, and all of the commercial establishments here in town are required to do so. They're about 20% of the levy. So that's why I say basically you've got about 50% of the levy base being handled by private haulers and 50% going to the transfer station. The transfer station has two parts to it, as you probably know. One is the so-called municipal solid waste, which is going to Wheelabrator from the main hopper up there. Southborough's contract with Wheelabrator will have run for about 50 years, ending in 2027. The situation is probably stable through the end of 2027, but it's going to have to be renegotiated significantly before that. It allows us to transfer Southborough residential and small business trash that's permitted by DEP regulations to go into a waste energy facility. We have a cost escalator built into the contract that's quite in our favor, I would say. It's 0.7 of it's one of those CPI consumer price indexes, the one for municipalities that is multiplied by 0.7. So that's worked out to be a pretty good deal for the town, and our current price there is $69 a ton. And reportedly, the Massachusetts average current tipping price is around $100, although I didn't try to go solicit bids from people to see if they sharpened their pencils what we would get, because we were under an existing contract. Wheelabrator itself is privately held. They used to be part of Waste Management, who divested them a number of years ago. They're owned by a private equity LLP based in Europe. That's not ideal because it doesn't give us good financial data on them. It's private. The contract stipulates that they must maintain a $50 million net worth. In my experience, that stuff those kinds of language never gives you the protection you think it will. But the fact that the owner has a large portfolio of these investments is a good sign, and there's no reason to believe it's unstable. All things considered, Wheelabrator looks pretty good right now. The transfer station as a physical facility is basically fine. The hopper is maintainable indefinitely with reasonable planning, which we seem to have, and the evidence for it is that it hasn't been shut down. It currently requires 2 staff attendants at that site today, one for MSW, the other for recyclables. Potentially, we could get down to 1 if there were better sight lines over there. We'll talk about that a little more later. The recycling area is run for us pretty much by E.L. Harvey. That is, they handle most of the recyclables. A few others, yard waste, et cetera, have specialized other vendors. We've had a lot of recent cost increases, but we're not alone. Currently, the whole recyclables area as a mix that goes out of there costs us about $57 a ton. But some of it, the commingled hopper, is $100 a ton. You might raise eyebrows by notice that it's cheaper to send commingled to Wheelabrator putting it in the main hopper, but that's illegal. Okay, so let's break this down a little bit and look at what's been going on. We shipped a little over 2,500 tons to Wheelabrator for $175,000 a year or two ago. The tonnage that we've been shipping has been slowly declining per capita over 15 years. That's basically good. That's the kind of statistic that the environmental folks like DEP like to see, that is per capita refuse is declining. We don't have very good handling because we don't have all the data, but I've been able to do some sort of fancy extrapolation that suggests that it's going down. The cost has been dropped sharply a number of years ago because of a renegotiation of the contract. So in 2012, we spent $226,000 for slightly more refuse than we have today. But in 2019, we were at 174, up a little bit from 2018. Again, we got a pretty good deal, $69 a ton versus the market about 100. Recyclables on a cost basis are 22% of our costs now, but just a few years ago it was zero. So you can see there's a great deal of volatility there. The prices are all over the map by type. Our total tipping expense was $232,000 in a recent fiscal year. So now looking at the total operations in Southborough, the costs, the basic structure of the situation is that we have pretty high fixed expenses. The $311,000 you see here is mostly fixed expense. That the breakdown into categories of fixed expense versus variable expense is not the one that our accounting system traditionally does, although it's conventional for business accounting. So I had to impute it a little bit, but most of the 311 is fixed. The only non-fixed portion there is the cost of driving trucks to Wheelabrator, which is non-zero, but it's still, most of that 311 is fixed expense. And then the variable expense is dominated by the tipping cost of 231. So we have about 50% fixed costs, at least, probably a little bit more fixed expense of running the T station.
Could I ask a question?
Yeah.
For the labor and benefits cost, do you know how many full-time employees that covers?
Well, it covers two. I could open it up for you, but it would be a pretty big diversion to dive into the spreadsheet. What I can tell you is that there's basically two full-time employees and fractional other employees who are charged to the T station, whose costs are charged to the T station. The number there, the 311, now when I looked over the numbers and when I looked over Karen's accounting, which was back in June when this project started, I noticed that she had a pretty complete cost, but she didn't have any of the retirement expenses. So I went to Brian Valentine and collected the retirement expenses, and these numbers include the retirement expense, which if you had been looking at the transfer station budget, the numbers would be a little different. You'd see it for that reason. But as far as the labor loading is concerned, if you really want the details, I can pull it out and get it to you offline. But that's about what it is. Basically, two full-time employees plus fraction of other people who also do other things and drive trucks to Wheelabrator sometimes. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So our variable cost is, on average, for MSW is less than $80 a ton. Probably, I guess it's around 72. I haven't pushed Karen to, okay, let's sit down and split all this out very carefully. It's pretty clear it's well less than 80, but it's above 69, which is a tipping fee. Our total cost per disposed ton, and this is a number to remember, is $140. That's fully loaded, and we're going to take a look at some other towns, and the number will come up again when we do so. All right, so how do we pay for it? We've got $543,000, they're round numbers, to pay for. We collect $424,000 from sticker fees. So the balance is covered by the levy of $118,000. That's about 0.3% of the total levy. All right, now let's back up a second because we need to sort of lay a preparatory quantitative background here to look at the choices we might make later on. And one piece of laying that background is to understand the total costs for the town of handling solid wastes. And they're important in case we wanted to consider, for example, municipal curbside pickup, because currently some of those costs on the total town are being borne by private pickup. And if we were going to do it all together municipally, we would want to understand what our municipal costs were, including the portion currently covered privately. Now, there are three types of costs: T-station operations, residential private curbside, and commercial disposal. But pretty much as soon as I put number 3 up here, I'm going to cross it out because we don't have any data on number 3 at all. And we only have estimated data on number 2, but it's better than nothing. So down at the bottom here, you see my estimates for the costs of the probable costs of residential private curbside operating here in town. So we're probably spending for residential disposal of all types of material, we're probably spending a little under $1 million, 983 is what the estimate is here. If we had better data, which you'll see I recommend we try to get, then we would be able to pin these numbers down better because we would know what our residential private curbside haulage and tonnage were. But we don't really know now. I'm doing some sort of some estimating to get those numbers. All right. Now, let's review some of the fundamentals covered here. The T-station is a large fixed expense. We got variable costs. We have another point is that we have lots of excess capacity right now. That is, the transfer station is not anywhere near its capacity, and Wheelabrator will take as much as we give it as long as it comes from Southborough. And we have a pretty low cost per ton. Our basic operating economics imputed back into the municipal accounting system, if you will, is that the average residential customer, not per capita, but residents considered a residence as a customer, brings about 1.6 tons per year to the transfer station and pays an average after discount of $173 per year, which means we have an average $109 estimated variable costs per customer, including both recyclables and MSW. And so the average customer at the transfer station yields about $64 contribution to of operating margin contribution towards the fixed expenses. What are the implications of this? Number one, if we lose customers at the transfer station, that's bad. If we gain customers, that's good. And the transfer station competes with curbside service, so it has to be competitive. And when we look at Wayland and Sudbury, you'll see what happens when towns ignore that fact and drive themselves into the ditch. We shouldn't imagine we're running a monopoly. We're not. Citizens here make the choice all the time. Do they want curbside or they want the transfer station? And running this thing efficiently and economically requires we pay attention to that. If we could bring in more MSW volume at close to the market price per ton, it's a big if, but if we could, that would help. And there might be some ways of doing that, which we can think about later. All right. Now, this question came up last night. How stable has the residential selection rate for the transfer station been? And the answer is it's been very stable since 2014. Excuse me. So here you see the blue line in the middle is non-senior residences. These aren't the total stickers because there are secondary stickers, but basically how many residences have the right to go to the transfer station? That number has been very stable for the last 7 years. And the seniors have been pretty stable too. The total is stable. So you layer on top of that the fact that there's about, best that I can tell, about a 2.5% growth in total residences. It might be a little higher than that because we've added more multifamily dwellings. I don't have an exact residence number, but that's the population growth. I'm imputing it back into residences. The point is that it's basically flat. And so we don't have any signal coming through here that this transfer station is becoming markedly less popular. and we need to continue to watch that for reasons I'll explain later. Now, I really pulled together most of that information back in June, and then July and August went through looking at comparable towns. The first step was to select the towns to compare to, and that was done by a query against the Mass Department of Revenue database using population, income per capita, and population density as the main selection criteria. Note, I did not try to pick out towns based on the characteristics of their handling of refuse. What popped out of that was focusing on Medfield, Norwell, Wayland, and Sudbury. The methods for gathering it was I basically crawled through all their public documents, the types of things that you people leave on the website as a kind of post-budgeting detritus. And then I interviewed people, mainly DPW chiefs. So go through those. Medfield, it's basically a clone of Southborough. They even send their trash to the same place as Wheeler Brader and E.L. Harvey. There are some minor differences. Lower sticker fee than ours. A little more dependence on the levy, but basically very similar. It seems to be operating well and very comparable costs to our own.
Hey, John, quick question.
Yes.
This is John Rooney. How are you?
Hey, how are you, John?
Good.
Nice to hear you.
Nice to hear from you. Great. Thank you for doing this. Do you know the difference or the how it's divided up in Medfield as to T-station versus private haulers? Is it similar to our?
Yeah, it's. I do have the data. I'd have to go. I have a heap of data, and it's in the heap. I do have that data. It's close to ours. That is, okay. It's dominantly. It has at least half or more transfer station, as opposed to, we're going to see in a minute, Wayland and Sudbury. Okay, so Medfield is mostly or at least half transfer station. If you want the exact numbers, I'd have to dig in and get them.
Where it generally compared.
Yeah, that's right. It wouldn't work out and say it's the same, similar to ours if it weren't a high fraction of T-station users.
Right. Thank you.
Okay. Now, can I move on? Norwell. Norwell is about our size, but they're entirely municipal curbside, operated for them by Waste Management at a cost of $308 per household per year. And the basic service results in a very infrequent need for customers to buy additional removal service, because they basically get to fill one large barrel and one extra large barrel every week with refuse and recyclables. And so there isn't much pay as you throw, although technically it does have a price for overages. If you want 2 barrels this week, you got to pay a little more, but there's not much action on that front because we could see there was very little collection. Seems to be working well. They've been with Waste Management for a couple of years, and functioning system. They do have a holdover transfer station operation only for recyclables. Most of these people who do curbside, municipal curbside, when they first started, recyclables were only through the municipality, and they've all switched to requiring the curbside operator to also pick up recyclables in order to encourage recycling. And a few of them still have residual recycling type transfer stations, but they don't take any refuse there. It seems to be a minor function there. Okay, now let's look at the contrast significantly, Sudbury and Wayland. Sudbury has a town transfer station, but it's almost, it's 4/5 private curbside. The transfer station numbers are hard. The private curbside is estimated because, again, we don't have good data on private curbside there either. The transfer station operations are a sticker fee plus a fee per bag. You have to put it in the bag you buy at one of the supermarkets. It's only open 3 days a week for 7 hours. They only dispose 1,000 tons. Note that that's about, we're more than a third of what we do. The shocking thing about Sudbury is that their cost per disposed ton is at fully loaded cost is $319 for refuse. And we're operating at 140. It's just amazing that this thing goes on at that price. Now it's pretty much paid for entirely by users, but there aren't many of them. So $319 is above the average cost for curbside haulers if curbside haulers were counted on a cost per ton basis. So it's like you're paying to drive the stuff to the transfer station. I mean, I don't know. Anyway, no wonder not many people use it. So and Sudbury sort of is gnashing his teeth over this a little bit, but Wayland, I interviewed the DPW chief at Wayland. They're not quite as bad, but they're not in a good spot either. They have 1,875 T-station users, but still almost twice as many residential curbside private. And they have pay-as-you-throw, short hours, and their cost per ton fully loaded is around $250. The DPW chief in Wayland said to me, I could save the town taxpayers quite a bit of money if we closed the T station and went to single contract townwide curbside. But the problem is that taxpayers just put $1.4 million into capital upgrades at the transfer station, and I don't know how I'd get the idea through, So he just recently moved there from Medway, and he was telling me about the Medway also has townwide curbside, and they have a very attractive price there in Medway. So I learned a little bit about Medway, both from him and also the fact that Karen Galligan lives in Medway. So we kind of got a little bit of leakage of other towns into this view. But the main point here is that it's possible to run a transfer station that may not be making these people unhappy, but is operating at very high costs. And so you could say, well, if the residents of these towns who are using a transfer station prefer a transfer station to curbside, and they're willing to pay more for a transfer station than for curbside, well, okay. But the fact of the matter is that both of these are sort of leaking onto the levy base with some regularity to keep them operating, even though they're operating at absurdly high costs. In Wayland, only 15 months ago, ran out of money mid-year and had to get $100,000 from the reserve fund to keep the transfer station operating. So I don't know, it's pretty crazy. All right, so so now looking at those, what conclusions do we draw? The high fixed expense of running a transfer station is a key economic factor, and the lesson for us is, watch that. That's the risk. Don't fall into that situation unless citizens really want you to. But I don't think that the Wayland DPW chief basically thinks that most of the citizens aren't aware of what's going on, really. So we need to sort of be careful to be sure that the transfer station remains popular and people are willing to pay for it, and we have reasonable costs, which we do now. The Norwell and Medfield, on the other hand, show us that our model and other models can work. Norwell model works just fine, but its disadvantage compared to us is that it's a one-size-all-fits model, and so it's higher costs for quite a few citizens, but it's lower cost compared to private curbside. It's also the case, and if you imagine in Norwell, there's one company that's waste management that's going to come pick up your trash. If you think there's some value to being able to have E.L. Harvey or waste management or somebody else, then maybe you're willing to pay more for a choice of who picks up your trash. But I've never heard that anyone particularly cared, but maybe there are service quality differences. It's hard to know where the marketplace choice is something that's of value. All right, now what's the situation today in Southborough then? If you're looking at, you move here and you say, well, what do I want to do? I went out and shopped the market. The best quote I got was $442 per year for household weekly pickup. but I also found that some people want to charge more, 520, whatever. But I would conclude from that with our current T-station sticker price at $2.50, there's not a lot of room to raise the T-station price, because most citizens, I think, and this is speculation, regard curbside pickup as a better service. And as for pay as you throw at the transfer station, it would be a complicated changeover, and there would be some risk of driving customers away and getting into chasing an adverse revenue situation in that regard. So let's summarize then, where are we as a town here? We've got a lot of choices for residents at varying price points. If you're over 65, you pay $25 average on your tax bill, and you have transfer station if that's what you want. If you're under 65, the total cost is $2.50 for the transfer station, plus the $25 you pay in your taxes for $2.75. And if you want to go private curbside, the average quoted price was $5.25, but the range is $4.40 to $6.30. There's a low tax burden here on non-users. So if you're Southborough and you want to go private, because as a resident, you're not paying a lot of money in your taxes. $25, you pay $10,000 in average taxes, which $25 is there to give you the choice of using the transfer station if you want to buy the sticker. So it's not a huge amount. But it's worth noting that half of our levy base is outside of the transfer station world. And if you're a commercial taxpayer here, you could say, well, this is one more on the list of tax injustices if you wanted to, but it's real small. It's, 96% of the cost of the transfer station, one way or another, is being paid for by residents. And so the T station isn't a big part of any commercial taxpayer's burden. We're operating at a good cost per ton among comparable towns, and from a sort of ecological social responsibility viewpoint, it appears that we have declining tonnage per capita, which is a major statistic looked at by, in the sort of ecological concern world. We do have a big upcoming question, which is this Wheeler-Brader contract is going to come up. It's going to be on us before we know it, and we need to prepare ourselves to figure out strategically what do we want to do with regard to that. I'll get to that at the end.
John, was that the 2027 deadline?
Yeah. So
Okay,
yeah, it expires at the end of 2027. It contains language saying that a year ahead of time we'll start to negotiate, and there's just work to be done for that, including, it seems to me, the town is implicitly probably going to be making a decision. Do we want to stay with the transfer station and Wheeler-Brader for 30 years if they're looking for another 30-year contract? Or do we want to fundamentally switch? That's the logical time to.
John, this may come up later, but is there a competitor to Wheeler-Brader? Do other companies and you try to negotiate the contract?
Well, first of all, we could say, hey, Wheeler-Brader, goodbye, and we're just going to go private curbside and do a deal with for the total picture with, for example, Waste Management, just the way Norwell does, or the way Medway does. And then we might ask them the question, hey, we assume that you're disposing of this properly in accordance with DEP rules, but actually we wouldn't need to worry about it. I mean, so yes, there certainly are options. And there are also some other waste energy plants. I can't imagine why we would go to one. So for example, there's one called CMAS, which is down just this side of the Cape Cod Canal. I forget which town. It's another waste energy facility. I don't think it's owned by the same firm as owns Wheeler-Brader, but I don't know for sure. But anyway, we might be able to cut a deal with CMAS. Hey, you want to burn our trash, as an alternative if we wanted a waste energy solution. But I didn't go too far down that path, except to notice that there are certainly quite a few others around. Are they shopping? Are they open for more business? I don't know.
Thanks.
So, but we will have choices for sure. There's no doubt about that. Okay. Now, looking at, so there's near-term choices. There's a bunch of things that people have said, well, maybe we should do this, maybe we should do that right now. And then there's the strategic question of, okay, 2027, we don't want to sign a 30-year contract to keep doing what we're doing if that isn't really what we want. So let's put aside the strategic things right now and look at the questions that got this going, this study going, that are right in front of us. And those break down to, how do we want to run this thing that is real operational management choices versus how do we want to collect money for it and do our accounting? Those are different questions. So we're going to take the operational management ones first. So one thought is, people kick it around all the time, is let's get rid of the T station, just switch to townwide curbside. And that has actually some sub-choice ways you can do it. Here, you could go 100% private. You just say, as a town, I'm getting out of this business. We're going to close the T station. We're not going to do trash anymore. It's all private. Boylston did this, exactly this, about 15 years ago. We have every reason to believe it can work. It ends up being the most expensive thing, total out-of-pocket cost for the citizens, because they are all signing up for private contracts. You got 4 different trucks maybe running up and down my street, and that costs more money than having a town-wide contract. But of course, maybe there's some argument that it provides better service through competition and choices. It's very hard to quantify that, but I would estimate that the cost of doing that would be around 1.8 million. You just take the current price times the total number of residences, and that's what you come up with, versus what we're spending now, which is 980,000. Now, the other B, shown as B here, way to go townwide curbside, is go with a townwide contract, just the way Norwell does. And you put the thing out to bid. Medway has a different, Medway does not use Waste Management, they use another supplier. They have the best contract that I saw, $925,000 for doing Medway. If we did this via option B, it would cut the costs for current private curbside users, but it would increase the costs for everyone else who's using the transfer station. Not by a huge amount, but it would. You would need some sort of quality monitoring and customer response systems. People are going to call the town and say, hey, you know, they didn't pick up my trash, or I found my barrel over in my neighbor's snow pile, or whatever. You know, there's going to be a lot of those calls all the time. You have to figure out some way to handle them. And the Medway, the guy who used to run Medway, who's now at Wayland, whom I interviewed, said, you need to figure this out. And you also need to do quality monitoring on whoever you do the contract with. Just things to think about. We also could do curbside with town trucks and town employees. I didn't really look at that. Now the question though exists, why would we want to do this right now? The current system is functional and provides choices at reasonable costs. We would really need to have a strong signal coming from the citizen base saying, hey, do this, we want to switch to curbside. We need that now, or we would need to believe that we were going to slide into this Sudbury Wayland situation, and people said, hey, let's not do that. Let's before we get into a Sudbury Wayland situation with high costs and the citizens still paying money for the thing, let's get out of that business. But right now, that's not happening. If we if we did, we might regain some land to repurpose the land over the transfer station, maybe. All right, so that's that. Now, private operation of the transfer station. This also can be done. Every possible solution is out there, including, as I've said, a lot of some bad ones and some good ones. Westboro has private operation of the transfer station. I didn't go into it in detail. Their numbers are fairly different. But before we went into a Wheeler-Brader renewal, this also should be looked at. All right. Now, another thing, in fact, this is the topic that kicked this whole thing off, which is Karen said, Karen Galligan said, maybe we should rebuild the transfer station because we could save a little bit of operating costs. The concept is rebuild it so you can supervise with one employee. There might be some land repurposing, but probably not. It would go a little further back. The hoppers would be in the back further. But the cost benefit analysis of it basically just says there's no financial justification for doing this, really. There's savings of about $81,000 a year after a 5-year transition. But it costs $2.5 million. You know, being the person that I am, I did a fancy analysis, but guess what? You can just divide, you come up with 30-year payback. 30-year paybacks end up saying to you, this is not a financial question. Go think about it some other way, because 30 years is not a meaningful amount of time to use financial analysis for. It's just too long. So there's no financial justification. No one's come up with any other justification for it. And Karen seemed, perfectly okay with this conclusion. All right. Next thing that gets tossed about was very popular about 15 years ago for towns transitioning to. It doesn't seem to be so trendy right now, is adopt a pay-as-you-throw system at the transfer station. Currently, Massachusetts makes available a large database of what everybody's doing in this area. We happen not to be in it because we didn't answer the questionnaire, but 137 of 350 Massachusetts communities currently use pay-as-you-throw. So what, a third of them? Or maybe a little less than half. It's basically pay-as-you-throw as a volume reduction system. It's not mainly a funding system. And I looked at the ones who have it. They get some money out of pay-as-you-throw, but mostly they're still being paid for by sticker prices. It has the risk of destabilizing that revenue cost balance over the transfer station. If residents leave for private curbside because getting a hold of the bags or the stickers is a pain in the neck, then we could drift towards a Wayland-Sudbury situation. And our comparatively high income per capita in this town, sky high, I could say, suggests we would be at that risk. We could do more analysis on this, but that's the top level on it. Another option to potentially change the economics is to shorten the T station hours. It is clear that we're on the longer side right now with 4 days and 40 hours a week. I think that the question is really how hard or easy it would be to translate that to savings because of the way staffing works. It might be difficult to actually gain the benefits of shortening the hours. Karen still gets requests for longer hours and for Sunday hours, so there's pressure in both directions, you might say. But nevertheless, for completeness, this option needs to be put on the table.
Question?
Yes.
Hi, this is Tim Martell.
Yeah.
Does Karen have any information about usage by time of day and day of week?
Yeah, there is, I remember so you're going to laugh given your question, but right at the beginning, I decided to ignore that.
Okay.
Yeah, she has some, I'm not sure time of day of week. There was some absurd level of detail about maybe it was what weeks of what months or what days of the year. I don't know. There is some stuff. She has some of that, and I just said too detailed for these questions. I didn't look at it closely. But here's what I do know. There's a huge amount of excess capacity, okay, in terms of the physical facility and Wheelabrator, okay? So if you want to figure out, in fact, by the way, you might be shocked to know that in 2004, I think it was, we shipped almost twice the amount of stuff from our town to Wheelabrator as we do now. So now it didn't all go through the hopper. Some of it went directly because of the way we were operating at the time, but with private curbside, allowed to use our Wheelabrator contract. But nevertheless, we have a vast amount of unused capacity over there. Okay. Should I move back to this? I'm sorry, Tim, I don't have details on your question to answer your question, but Karen might.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Okay. So now, then there's questions that get raised about what's fair or the equitability of how we do this. And I would note that there's no single standard that everybody agrees to about what's equitable. And you might say, if you want to be sort of a middle of the road kind of person, you kind of look for a blend of different theories being put into practice. And if I do that, take that approach, I say the current practice has good equitability. First of all, it's mostly paid for by user fees. That is, and many people will say if you don't use it, you shouldn't pay for it. But of course, we operate lots of things that don't work that way, like our public schools. So there's no universal principle here. And it also, and the other side of that coin is that there's a low burden financial burden put on non-users. The senior discount, meets different equitability tests. Some, people will say, well, those who can most afford it should pay for something that everybody needs. Seniors often selects a lower income group, but they also impose lower costs relative to other segments. If you're in the 42% that have households in this town that have school children, there's a huge asymmetry there with respect to the cost of that, in which the transfer station discount and the senior center are tiny by comparison. So one can construct an equitability story around the operation of the T station that is seemingly pretty fair. But I would also note, you don't have to think about equitability at all if you don't want to, but if you do think about it, you might as well think quantitatively, and that's what I've tried to do here. Okay. Now, another thing that gets tossed about is let's fund the transfer station 100% with the levy and eliminate the sticker fee. Well, we jump right into equitability analysis on that by saying, that's pretty unequitable for non-users. You get half the levy base is going to suddenly be paying for something that only the other half uses. It's like, whew, that most people would not jump to saying that that's an equitable change. There's no administrative gain because we'd still need stickers. Years ago, those of you who have been around here for a long time know that we had a transfer station for decades with no stickers at all. It was just an honor system, but we're never going to go back to that. So you need stickers. And then you need to find space in the levy for $425,000, which is a 0.9% bump. It could be done, but it's not a small sum to find in the tax base. And presumably, if you're buying private curbside, you'd go to town meeting and say, why do I want to do this? I don't want to vote for this. So that's the levy. I can't see much reason to move it there. Now, here's something that's got into this since the presentation of the capital budget. I got some responses. One response said these two things. One would be, if you put in the levy, it's tax deductible. So I kind of dove into analysis of this and pretty quickly realized that, no, it's not going to work. Basically because the federal tax, which is the only one that's potentially sizable to make it worth counting, stops at $10,000 for maximum deductions. You got an average tax bill in this town of $10,000, and then that's even without counting the Massachusetts income tax, the Massachusetts sales tax, all of which can add up to meet your $10,000 deductible. And then if you go to the opposite end of the spectrum, people aren't itemizing anyway, so it just doesn't work. We shouldn't think about tax deductibility under the present tax law. Then there's also been claimed that, well, the levy is more fair because more valuable properties pay more. That's a pretty strange argument because there's actually a fair amount of case law in various states around saying that the real estate tax is not sufficiently progressive for funding schools. And so there's people deciding that it's actually not progressive at all, in fact, the opposite. So it's strange to run into the claim that it would be helpful, and it directly would hurt classic low-income groups that are currently using the transfer station free, seniors because of the senior discount, or our apartment and condo dwellers, all of whom have private curbside. Both of them would end up being hurt by putting this into the levy. Okay. Now, so if we want to do something like get this $118,000 out of the levy, how could we do it? Well, we talked about rebuilding the transfer station. That's a nice idea, good to think that way, but doesn't work financially. And the other possibility is to increase revenue by selling some more trash tonnage, MSW tonnage, because we have low costs, relatively speaking. It might be possible to bring in some more. We used to do that. We used to take private curbside into Wheelabrator for different reasons, but it potentially could be done. It just requires more investigation. We also potentially could do something with certain kinds of commercial trash here in town. But there's no one really knows yet, without some more research, whether this could work. And so I put on here at the last line, not a promise. You know, we might be able to do something, get some more revenue. I did a quick estimate, you might get $25,000 to $75,000. But it might not be possible at all. We just have to look at it if you want. Okay, now let's talk about move from operating stuff to accounting stuff. How do we or move into the accounting side? How do we account for this? There are two other right now we account for it in the budget, as you know. Two other methods, enterprise and revolving fund. Wayland uses a revolving fund and they're trying to get out of it, basically because of the deficit not permitted rule under the state revolving fund regulations, pushed them into a crisis when they were short of money 15 months ago. And the DPW chief is trying to get out of the revolving fund accounting method. Enterprise fund has a few more flexibilities, but it really, we would need to my way of thinking, we need a couple of years of having this thing with no tax burden to want to think about getting into an enterprise fund. And I would note that neither one of these accounting methods are half so valuable as good management, because I mean, both of those towns have these two things, but to my way of thinking, you know, they're running a very high priced service for a small amount of trash. Okay, now there's another subject here, which is licensing. I've done some work on this since the capital budget presentation. I think we should ask the Board of Health to license private haulers. No low license fee, cover administrative costs only, but we would like to know how many tons they're hauling, how many customers, where it's going by type. I have looked at other towns in the Commonwealth. It's easy. Many of them have requirements to license private haulers. I've listed some of them here, but I can tell you that hundreds of our 350 communities do require a license for the haulers, and they have different kinds of requirements for getting these licenses, but some of them do have exactly these types of information requirements that I'm suggesting here. My main reason for suggesting that we do this is that we don't know what Wheelabrator is going to ask for, and we need to know the tonnage. Basically, we need to know the tonnage of the total available tonnage that could go to Wheelabrator from this town before we can do a good job of negotiating a new 30-year contract or whatever it turns out to be from a term viewpoint. And I think that this is the best way to get solid data, because half of our tax base is really invisible to us right now. We don't know the cost, the tonnage, or its composition. And I think we should politely ask the Board of Health to do something like many of the other boards of health are doing. And I think that by 2025, we really should we ought to face up as a town to some basic questions about what we want our direction to be, stick with the present system or possibly change it. And we have to have good data before we get into that conversation. So summing up, Wheelabrator looks good, but you know, everything we see looks pretty good about that, but it has some blind spots. We don't have their full financials. Recycling is unstable, but you know, we're stuck with it because it makes sense to do it ecologically, and we're required to do it legally. Looking around the other town, the lessons is, hey, some places work well, some places don't work so well, and you can be either one. So you can screw up and try not to is a good idea. The choices, rebuilding the transfer station doesn't look like it's a good idea. Adding tons, maybe we could look at that, and licensing private haulers, I think we should do. everything we have basically works pretty well right now. We have no crises here at the moment. We're saving citizens $750,000 a year compared to the Boylston solution of, hey, you go all figure it out privately. But we're only maybe $100,000 or $200,000 less than what municipal curbside would probably cost us. And we have a reasonably equitable funding system, and people can argue about what makes things equitable, but I'm willing to take a little bit of everybody's view on that. And we don't have a big tax impact of this thing. It's 1/3 of 1% of the levy. It's 0.0026, I think, last year. So it's like, we must have something better to do than worry about that. Okay, so what could we do further on here? I've started looking at Board of Health regulations, and you know, so I can do more of that. Get some models. Maybe I found 1 or 2 that are asking for what we want. I said to Karen that I would do some investigation of how we would move forward with finding out about whether we could bring in some more tonnage. And then there are some things that I don't necessarily recommend, but if someone said we really must do, we could potentially do resident surveys or new residence trends, or investigating the Westboro model some more. That I think we should do before we get into the Wheelabrator conversation, but we don't need to do it right now. Okay, now a few subsequent concluding notes. I know I've been going on a long time here, but before we get into the Wheelabrator contract renewal situation, what we need to go through as a town about this topic. So the Wheelabrator contract, at least as it originally was, and may very well be in its renewal, is very unusual. The town doesn't have 30-year contracts. You know, they don't exist. And I don't know whether it's going to be that again, but it might very well be a long-term contract. So before we do that, we should, as a town, think about all the possibilities and try to guess what our long-term trends are from everything we can see. Because everything we do there could affect what we decide to focus on in putting a deal together with Wheelabrator. The best way to know what we want is to know what people spend their money on, okay? That is, what is actual use, what's going on that people are doing now. I trust that much more than asking them to vote on things or asking them to fill out surveys. But there's some role for surveys, and town meeting in the end, assuming that we have a longer than, I think it's 8 years, the max contract to sign with Wheelabrator, the town meeting will have to approve it, but that'll be too late for any significant decisions. All right. Now, so thinking about Wheelabrator for a minute, we need to really step back for 1 second and say, why in the world is the town involved in this? Okay. The original reason, beginning in the 19th century into the mid 20th century, was public health. That's why the Board of Health has this statutory role. It's 100 years old. Get rid of the farm pits, eliminate random dumping. It's probably not an issue anymore for a fully built out suburb such as ours. So what are the justifications in 2025 for having the town involved? One justification that the town could say, this is why we do it as a town, is cost savings of collective purchasing. We're saving right now money by having a transfer station. Norwell saves money compared to the Boylston model by having a town-wide single contract. Assuming that the value of being able to pick to choose the sign on the side of the truck that comes by your house is very low. But if you think the town's involvement is going to guarantee savings, well, just look at Wayland and Sudbury. They're not saving anything. So you got to run it reasonably. Then if you believe that there should be some equitable redistribution of costs, you can't do that privately. You have to have public involvement. But not everyone believes in that. I would note that sometimes you see people saying, well, it should be a town service because everyone needs it. Well, it takes about 5 seconds of thought to realize that that's not much of a justification, because socially everyone needs food, everyone needs shelter, electricity, transport. That's all mostly private here and in most places. So the notion that everyone needs it doesn't create a justification for town's involvement in trash. So I would say 2025, we should ask ourselves basic questions before we sign up for another 30 years of Wheelabrator. And do we want to try to save some money as a community by doing something socially through the municipality? And what do we want to do? Now, here's the picture we could face. This is not data. This is John's mythological future. Okay, so on one hand, we could be looking at right now we have the blue line. If you look backwards, this is years in the future down across the x-axis, and how many customers do we have for the transfer station on the y-axis. If you run backwards in time, back to 2014, you've got the blue line. The blue line is basically flat for the last 7 years. If we're flat for the next 7 years, and people keep signing up for the T station every year, or if by any chance the purple line is going upward, then that says, hey, we have half the population is using this, likes it, wants to spend money this way. We probably keep the transfer station and do a deal similar to what we have with Wheelabrator. On the other hand, if we see a downward drift in the transfer station usage, or if we saw, for example, that a lot of tonnage was going privately, that most of the tonnage was going privately, then we might consider other options, including not renewing Wheelabrator and going to something like the Norwell model. But we need to know, with better data than we have right now, what is going on and continue to track it. But right now, we're on the blue line, basically, the middle there. It's not absolutely flat, but it's flat enough to say that's where we are. Okay, so plan to collect a few years of data so we have good understanding before then, in 2024, start to belly up to a decision here, because I would note, I don't think this is any pejorative surprise cast upon the town, that the town doesn't slide things quickly and easily. We're not structured for crisp decision making around here. And so we may need, a year or two of consideration to decide what we want to do, possibly. And so we could stay with it, or we could, the Norwell model or the Medway model is definitely available if we wanted to do that. The main thing is, I would say, don't get to this situation where you've got a DPW chief saying, I don't know why I'm doing this. It costs more money. I could save them all a lot of money if they let me do something else. That's where we don't want to be. Okay, that's it. Questions?
Go ahead.
This is Tim. Have you considered that the cultural impact on the town if the transfer station were removed?
No.
It's the only place.
I'm not advocating the transfer station removal. But no, people can have all the conversation they want about that, and I might even join in that conversation, but it'd be purely personal. It wouldn't. This is,
I don't. It's not numbers based, but when you think about, the car washes, the Cub Scouts.
I'm happy to have you consider it. I just didn't. Yeah, I'm not discounting it. I'm not saying it's not important, but for me to make assertions around what we ought to do at the transfer station based on my feelings about that didn't seem like it was a big town service on my part. But I would agree, if somebody wants to talk about it, I agree. It's been an important and could continue to be an important social facility if people use it. But look at Sudbury. It can't be one there. It's like a tiny fraction of people who are there.
Hey, John Rooney, quick question. The Wheelabrator contract expires in 2027, and right now we're at $69 per ton. Do you know if any town has recently negotiated with Wheelabrator? And
it's an excellent question. No, I don't know. I don't know the answer whether anyone has recently negotiated. And it's an excellent question. If I were moving, so I began this thing with a bunch of these short-term questions. In particular, Karen had said, I only need $2.5 million to fix up the transfer station. That's what got this thing going. So I spent time basically pulling all the basic picture together to that. And then after we kind of got through that, I said, we really should be thinking about this Wheelabrator thing more, even though it's out a couple of years. And that question is high up there. I haven't answered it yet, though.
Thank you.
I think, does it make sense to summarize at least the positions that capital planning has taken thus far based on John's recommendations and where we suggested it was going to go?
So before we do that, I'm repeating something John said, but just to make it clear, capital planning, because John was not willing to jump back into a full-time commitment to committee, he basically said, I would be happy to help out with a specific area of interest. So capital planning, he said, I am interested in solid waste. I know Karen, I get along with Karen fine. So he volunteered to basically help capital planning answer the question, do we need to replace the hopper? So that was capital planning's question. Capital planning's purview doesn't include where to put the transfer station sticker and negotiating the Wheelabrator contract and getting the BOH to license it. So there's much more here than just the hopper issue. So Jason, you want to take it from there as far as capital planning, then let's go back to where we think we should go with this.
Yeah, so I think just as a reminder, the reason we were able to get the help and look at this, right, from Mr. Butler was on the capital plan for this year, in consideration for FY22, the town was going to likely invest somewhere between $2 and $3 million in the transfer station. And if you remember, during the budget discussions for FY21, the year we're currently in, there was originally $35,000 for an engineering study to take place to think about what to do with the transfer station, how to redo it, et cetera. And that was repurposed somewhere between March and the actual town meeting in June to be more to support the capital planning committee. I think what you've heard from John tonight, right, is there's no need to invest in capital at the moment in the transfer station. And we have a 5-year window where we need to look at things far beyond the capital needs of the transfer station. So what capital has voted on unanimously, and there was basically no conversation, Kathy, if I recall, the discussion when we actually voted on it, that we support Mr. Butler's conclusion that we shouldn't be investing a dime other than just regular maintenance and upkeep on the transfer station. And we're not planning to bring forward any capital article this year, which will help because, as you'll see in future agenda items here, we have a lot of capital coming. So that's where that committee stands. Obviously, that was relayed to BOS last night, John, when you made your presentation there. I didn't hear any negative feedback on that. And as Kathy mentioned, there's a whole slew of items that someone needs to take on here. It's clearly outside of capital. No one on capital was jumped up and down to work through it. So I guess what I propose here, Kathy, I think this is clearly in advisory's wheelhouse. It's clearly in public work planning board's wheelhouse. And clearly Mr. Butler has outlined what else needs to be done. So if there is a committee member here that was really interested in working on it, I think we should absolutely nominate them to continue to work through this and continue to come back with recommendations, because it's obviously going to impact operational budgets for many years to come. And obviously we want to be in the right spot when this Wheelabrator contract comes up to make an educated decision.
Well, I definitely don't want to let this go to waste. We put it down and then someone forgets about it. We're not here in 4 or 5 years and this is all been for naught other than deciding not to replace the hopper. John, are you willing to stay with us for a few more months to try to? Okay.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I wouldn't, I think that I'm not quite sure. So I guess I haven't heard from anyone, I presented the Board of Selectmen last night. I haven't heard from anyone that, okay, we also want to take the other short-term questions off the table. And so I haven't gotten any direction yet with regard, other than the statement that Jason just made about the capital side of it. I haven't gotten any direction with respect to the other things that I sort of put down here and tried to walk through. For example, the Public Works Planning Board still has a sort of posture of saying we should put it in the levy. I don't know. And there are different things that I might do depending on what, if any of these other options anyone wanted to look at more carefully. I could do some more on that. But if you wanted to sort of say, no, the thing we really want to do is we want to see if we can nudge the Board of Health into agreeing to do some licensing. What would the content of the licensing be? I could definitely do some work on that. And I could do some work about laying down a sort of strategic timeline for Wheelabrator and the strategic questions the town should face before that. But if anyone said some of these other short-term things should be analyzed or worked on further, I could potentially look at doing that too.
Well, I believe that going back to whether these cost of the transfer station belongs in the tax base, partially, not at all, completely, does need to be focused on because of the Public Works Planning Board stance. Now, that committee is not very active. They meet extremely infrequently, but they have taken that position. So every year, the BOS has been very close to doing that, and then they've postponed it. So I don't know what the current thinking of the current BOS is, but I would rather be able to take a position in advisory, make them a recommendation to the BOS before they make a decision that may not be as well thought out as it could. So I think that's one. I think the licensing is two. And then just what you said, start preparing the plan to be ready to negotiate the new Wheelabrator contract.
That's fine. Yeah, that's all fine. I'm happy to hang in there. I'd rather hang in there a bit so that this doesn't go to waste than not, than walk away from it.
And that was the discussion at capital planning, John, is it's taken so long for someone to actually analyze it and then to have someone do such a thorough analysis that we didn't want it to go to waste.
Yeah, that's my
So,
feeling too.
Yeah.
Now, by the way, in terms of Kathy's recounting the history of this, when the question of the investment in the transfer station came up, I was the one really who said, look, we haven't looked at this whole big picture for 45 years. You know, why don't we just look at the whole thing? And that's how this thing ballooned into a comprehensive review on my initiative mostly. I mean, I wanted to get an answer to that question, but I thought, let's just look at the whole picture, you know, while we're at it. And so that's how it got here.
And the first short-term question, as far as, again, whether the sticker belongs in the tax base or not, that's got to be answered always early in each budget year, because we got to know soon whether it's going to be or not, because it goes in the budget process. So that would be one to jump on.
I don't think there's much more I can add to that. I sort of framed the question for everybody as far as I can see. If anyone has any specific things that would be research-based, could do it, but I don't know what it would be offhand.
I don't either. So I think maybe just putting that in a letter to the BOS, but
well, that's you guys ought to consider doing that. I mean, if you want to take a position on it, send it to the Board of Selectmen. That's fine. I don't think there's a work item for me on that front.
okay.
In terms of the immediacy of the next steps, I think it would be important, and John, I'm not necessarily saying that you should do this, but I think we should try to understand what Wheelabrator is negotiating right now per tonnage. And you know what, try to look at the crystal ball and consider where we'll be at 2027, and if there are any advantages of perhaps trying to renegotiate the contract sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I mean, you're sort of taking the ball and that I got here and running with it, which I think is great. I agree with all that completely. Now, whether Wheelabrator, I mean, about negotiating it early, you know, maybe. I mean, you just don't know whether they'd be willing to do so. They may just say, you know, we have a limited number of people who can negotiate these things, and we do them when we do them. You know,
Well, it probably depends on what they think about that $69 too.
Well, that's absolutely right, John. You know, that I would assume, without any more information, you would assume that they're going to try to bump you up to market if you reopen, if there's a reopening of the contract early. Right now, you know, we probably have a few more years of being significantly below market based on the current agreement.
All right, so why don't we do this? Advisory will basically discuss the transfer station sticker issue. And if there is a consensus there, we will write our letter soon to the Board of Selectmen. And then what about Jason's suggestion that someone from advisory be the liaison with John to keep this moving forward, including the BOH licensing, and possibly trying to figure out whether Wheelabrator should be started now, later, in between.
Okay, so here's what I will do specifically is I'm going to make a list of topics. I'm not going to try, I can't and should not try to reduce it to regulatory language. Somebody ought to, if the Board of Health is amenable to the concept, they ought to refer it to town council for that purpose. But I can put together, here's what, I've looked at, 15 towns. Here's the types of things they ask. Here's what we need to know. Here's, I think, what we should do in terms of our goals for regulation of private haulers here in Southborough. And I can put that together. And I think that on that front, someone needs to liaison to the Board of Health. I told them, by the way, and I also told the Economic Development Commission that this was going on, both that this study was going on. I haven't dealt with the Board of Health people recently, and they're different than they used to be when I was on advisory. So I don't know, but I would think maybe if advisory and Board of Selectmen wanted to consider requesting that they regulate private haulers in order to gather data, that I would volunteer to help them with the stuff that I've pulled together on that. I don't know
Okay.
about what the right process is.
Mr. Rooney, any comment on that plan? Okay, so that's what we'll do, is approach that piece of it that way. So John, do you want someone from advisory to work with you on?
I don't think there's much work. I mean, here's what I think. Here's what I'm going to do right now. I'm going to do that BOH thing I just described. I'm going to pull together some regulatory topics, and I'll float that back out to Karen, to you, and to the Board of Selectmen. Okay. And then I think it would be nice, maybe, if people thought it wouldn't produce an adverse reaction. It'd be nice if the Board of Selectmen and the Advisory Committee, if they thought they agreed with this, that they asked Board of Health to consider regulating it, and that, that I would be available to work with them on topics if they wanted that help. Then the other thing, by the way, that I have agreed with Karen Galligan to do is to look a little further at this question of whether we could bring in some more revenue by making some more use of our relatively low price at Wheelabrator. Nothing has happened on that yet, except Karen is pretty enthusiastic about that idea, I will say. So that's the only other thing I have right now on my plate. And I would just keep in touch with you and maybe Sam or somebody on the Board of Selectmen regarding progress on those things. But I think if you and the Board of Selectmen, if your committee, Board of Selectmen, want to ask the Board of Health, if you think that that's advisable to ask the Board of Health to consider regulating private haulers, then that would be a vote of your committee and a vote of the Board of Selectmen. I think it would be much better if we had the information, whether you're requesting it of them is exactly the right approach. I would think normally it would be, but I've seen instances in the distant past when Board of Health was jealous of their prerogatives.
Okay, so
Kathy,
go ahead, Jason.
I was just going to suggest, if you recall at the capital planning meeting, so that we could dispose of it from capital and move
Yes.
it out of capital, given it was out, we're going to summarize the list of to-dos, and I was going to run it by Mr. Butler, and then capital was going to send a memo to BOS and advisory. I would think that would include this BOH recommendation, and then I can provide like a draft template that this committee can then vote on next time we meet, right? And hopefully give BOS the template too, now that we've all heard the same thing now,
Yes,
essentially
right.
3 times, right? Between capital, BOS, and advisory. So hopefully build some consensus there and then chart the framework moving forward. And I know Mrs. Braccio, as the BOS rep to capital, was going to give some thought in terms of how we don't lose momentum from their side, right? And talk with the board there. I know it didn't happen last night necessarily, but thinking through, right, like, is there a BOS rep and an advisory rep to work with Mr. Butler to advance these things with BOH, with Karen, with Public Works Planning, and whoever else? I think that's probably the right way to go, is we could probably tackle that in the next meeting.
Yeah, I think a good goal for us, if we could agree, if we all agreed on it, would be to say that we'd be really nice if the Board of Health could launch in calendar year 21 a private hauler licensing system, because we need to, if we're going to get something, it's going to be a couple years data that we need. It's not going to come in overnight.
So Jason, I don't disagree with you. I still just don't know that that's the purview of capital planning to actually go any further with this. I really do think it belongs.
No, I agree. We were just summarizing, but if no one wants a summary, I'm happy not to do that. But that's where we landed. That's what the committee wanted to do last time, just to make sure someone picked it up, was the key. So if we hear from advisory, someone's going to pick it up tonight. I think we're done from capital, right? And then it becomes an advisory in BOS, and sounds like BOH matter.
So we could also ask John to summarize basically an action plan as far as what to do short-term, long-term. Get that to us, and then we discuss it again next week and start implementing. It sounds like he does. I think we need to appoint someone from advisory to liaison. We can always change
I've
that.
been using you.
I know.
Kathy. No, so.
So how does that sound? John, you
Okay with me.
okay? Anybody have an objection to that? The only other comment I wanted to make as far as what Tim said a few minutes ago about the kind of qualitative aspect of the transfer station, which is kind of hard to monetize, it's not, is that we all know we've lived through times when we had data right in front of us and it was very obvious what the decision should be, and yet the emotions got involved, everything in the world got brought up instead, and so it got, we turned it into something other than what it really should have been. So I could see that happening with the transfer station in a few years if we were to recommend, because of whatever we see, Wayland, Sudbury happening.
Yeah,
So I actually almost hope that we don't get there, but we'll see.
Swap Shop 2.
Yeah. Look at
Swap Shop 2, the movie.
Yeah, look at the swap shop, all the emotion that caused, and that's just the swap shop piece.
By the way, I found out in the course of this that swap shops are on the officially promoted DEP list of things they want you to have.
That's understandable too.
Yeah, it is. I didn't know it, but it is.
Okay. All right. Anyone else? Anything else for John before we go on to?
Okay.
Okay.
All
As
right, well,
always, thank you very much.
been fun. Thanks. See you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
you.
All right. So it's always interesting to hear anything he's got to say and learn from him. Okay, I'm going to change around the agenda a little bit, just so you know, going forward. I think there's a better flow of it to put a couple things together, so just stay with me. We are not going to approve the minutes from July 15th because their chairman did not get them done. They're almost done. I promise I'll be there in a couple days. They actually made it that hard, but I just kept picking up, putting them down.
Kathy,
So,
you're coming in.
Kathy, you're
coming in and
fading.
out.
okay, sorry. I think it's because I look down and not look up at my camera. So how's that?
That's better.
Okay, I need to look up. Okay, so did everyone hear what I said about the minutes from July 15th, which is the last time we met?
Yeah, we're just not going to review them tonight.
Yeah,
Right.
we'll do it next time. Yeah.
Okay.
And as everyone knows, Claire is our new recording secretary. She's been officially hired. She's got her contract. She is an independent contractor to the town. So we're all official. All right, so I am going to not do the chairman's update officially because what I've got to say is going to be incorporated in some of the specific agenda items. So I will be doing updates, but they're going to be specific to the agenda items. So I'm going to get rid of that one for the moment. Okay, so now let's jump into financials. So we're going to talk about fiscal year 20 first, and then fiscal year 21, and then fiscal year 22. So fiscal year 20, I sent you guys this afternoon 2 slides that basically summarize fiscal year 20. So the first one was the department turnbacks, the departments that actually gave back money to the town at June 30th, 20. There was quite a few of them. I circled the ones that are really big. The only major one that's missing from the turnback was the DPW. We did not do a reserve fund transfer or an interdepartmental transfer, so that means her budget was exactly 0. Most other departments did have money they've turned back. The schools turned back the $100,000 that they had thought they would, almost to the penny, which is unusual. They've never turned back money like that. So all in all, the turn back from budgets was about $478,000. So that's the good news. The bad news is local revenue was down quite a bit from the previous year. It still was well above the projections, so keep that in mind. The budget's always really, really conservative. So it's not that we didn't meet our budget, we did easily, but it was a lot less than the previous year. So the two almost offset each other as far as the impact on free cash, which is unfortunate. So we're going to start fiscal year 22 with less free cash than we had for fiscal year 21. It's going to be about $576,000 less. So our savings account going into the year is going to be about $1.3 million instead of $1.878 million. So we're already a little bit in a hole for fiscal year 22 compared to fiscal year 21. So that's about 1.5 points on your tax rate just by the reduction of free cash. If you look at the local fees that I sent you, you're going to see that the biggest decrease was in interest, both interest income on our idle cash and the interest we collect on late paid tax bills. And you can imagine why. Interest rates went down quite a bit after the pandemic hit, and we allow people to defer real estate taxes, which means the interest went way down. So the building fees went down too. Not as many building permits were pulled because of the pandemic. So there was a lot of pandemic related reductions in the local revenue. Fiscal year 21 that we're in now, we don't know. It started off, I think they think okay, but who knows? I mean, we're still, we're not through this, so we don't know if that's going to change too. But again, we do estimate this as a really conservative number. So the impact of any reduction from what the previous year was is going to be on the free cash that we need to start our year with to get us kickstarted here. So any questions on that?
I guess just a comment, Kathy, can you just repeat what you said about departmental transfers in reserve fund? It might have faded, I might have misheard you, but go ahead, sorry.
So I didn't say anything about reserve fund, but I can. The reserve fund, we used up, we gave back 28,000 of the 180. So most of it was the fiber from EMC, and then we had the 5 or 6 that we approved July 15th. So I didn't say anything about reserve fund, Jason, but that's your reserve fund story.
So on the departmental transfers, I think it's important when you look at the detail though, what we're looking at in terms of turn back is after the transfers, not before. So like if I think about BOS budget and some of the other budgets that there were transfers, and this came up in the BOS meeting last night too, these are after. So like some of these budgets, there were transfers into departments that actually caused them a turn back.
Yeah, but they weren't big. I mean, BOS was what, $1,000 or so they weren't big. So I guess they just didn't have the number finalized, which is true because, go ahead.
But it implies that BOS actually turned back money. So I think what BOS talked about specifically last night that I think we should also take a position on is I think these numbers should be presented prior to reserve fund. So some of these departments were in a hole, right? They got a transfer that got them out of the hole back to approximately zero, as opposed to seeing the numbers after their budget was fixed.
Right, that's a good point. So you're right. This is a little misleading. It looks like that they were positive when they were negative until we did the inter-departmental transfer. Remember, the departments up until now, we're going to talk about this in a second, are able to move their expenses within their budget as they see fit. So it's only when that doesn't is not satisfactory do they have to go to another department. So yes, you're right, Jason. It does make them look better than they really were. I agree. Okay, let's see. So the tax rate's not set yet. It looks like it's going to be, it's going the right way. It looks like it's going to be 16.26 per thousand, down from 16.66. I almost was John when he was, or John Butler was still on here. So years ago, advisory was pretty worried about the Southborough tax rate. By state law, you can't go over $25. And when we were looking at our the impact of the new building and also future buildings, we actually thought we were going to hit the $25 mark in the not too distant future. So we were concerned about it. That hasn't happened. We've actually gone the right way. So we're probably in the middle of the pack of all the towns in state of Massachusetts. So we're not going to be the first to have that problem. So we actually shouldn't have a problem. They'd have to fix it for someone else first. So I think we're okay there. It looks like the actual year-over-year tax increase is going to be a little bit higher than what we estimated at annual town meeting, which ended up being 0.77%, 77th of a 1%, so less than 1%. Once the amendment to the utility budget was passed, the year-over-year went down to 0.77. And if you listen to what I say every time I talk, I always use the word estimated, because all we do at town meetings is set the budget for the departments. There's other things that go into determining the tax rate that we have nothing to do with as far as setting. They are what they are. Or it is what it is. So what's happened since then, a couple things. So I always call and say, what's happened to affect it? So what's happened since then are 3 or 4 things. One's fairly big, the others are fairly minor and almost net out. First of all, the good news is the growth last year, the new growth was about $300,000 higher than what we had projected in when we did the budget. So we added about $750,000 of new growth. We had projected 445. So that was good news. The only thing that's going to go the other way is Paul Sabelli has asked to increase what we call the overlay, which is basically his little pot of money that he can use to basically fund abatement request if he has to give back some money for taxes. He's asked to increase that from the normal 400 that he asked for at town meeting to 600. And he may reduce that to 550. He's going to decide the next week or so. But what's happened is apparently the DOR has decided to change the methodology for which they assess personal property taxes against utility companies. So you say, well, what's that? That's the pipes and stuff that Eversource, et cetera, has in Southborough. And the change methodology is going to increase the taxes on that stuff by a lot. So he expects there to be a challenge. And so he wants to make sure he's got enough money to have to give back if the challenge were to succeed in total or partially. So that's one thing that's changed since we had our town meeting. The other thing is, and Jason will be happy about this, the town financed permanently the last tranche of the public safety building, which is about $2.5 million. So that got done. Interest rates are great right now. So we've gotten everything now permanently financed at really, really, really good long-term interest rates. So the original budget only included interest expense for the temporary note that was in place for that. With the permanent financing, you've got to pay principal too. So the debt service is going to go up a little bit for fiscal year 21, but they've got the interest rate locked in at a really low rate. So that's probably well worth it.
And they didn't actually finance the full 2.5 that they thought they were going to have to finance.
They financed what they needed, correct?
Exactly.
But it's done. It's permanently financed now at just a fabulous rate. So we've done a good job as far as the capital structure for that building. That part's good. Let's see what else. So I think that's all I got to say about fiscal year 20. Does anyone have any questions about the year we just ended? The free cash has not been certified, so I've given you what I think it is. It's 1.3. They will not tell me what they showed the state. They want it to be certified.
Kathy, didn't they send us an email like last week saying it was certified?
No, they said it's being certified. So if they've sent an email, they didn't send it to me.
Stand by. I remember seeing an email.
Okay. So you keep
looking. Brian and Mark on?
Mark's. No.
9/5 September 15th, 2020 at 5:40 p.m. to advisory committee from Brian Ballantyne. Free cash was certified at 1400293.
So thank you, Jason. So I was close. My little back of the envelope. So that's even a little bit better. So 1.4 compared to 1.878 the previous year. So we're still down $478,000, which is more than a point on a real estate tax year-over-year increase. So it's still a big number. All right, so it's done. So sorry about that. Okay, so now anything else on fiscal year 20 before we go forward to fiscal year 21?
I guess 2 comments on FY20 is I had requested from Mark and Brian a listing of what happened with people's vacation, holidays, etc., coming out of the pandemic. in particular because I knew it was causing union grievances in other towns, and was surprised that I hadn't seen anything on a BOS agenda, whether it be in public or executive session. And I got a listing of employees that either carried over or were paid out, predominantly contract employees, but there was a significant number of fire employees that were paid out because there was a freeze on their vacation, which is allowed by the union contract. And I think the observation I had, and we can talk as much detail as you want, Kathy, or just take it under advisement and do it at another meeting, was there was an inconsistent application of those payouts in terms of the people that were paid out were absolutely, based on my looking at their contract, allowed to be paid out the 1 week that they got. But there were others that I think took in the best interest of the town or didn't get a payout where they may have been able to. So we can go into as much detail as you want, but I would like to see, I guess, two things based on looking back. One, that this committee understand that there was well over $50,000 paid out of vacation, specifically across those employees, and think through how for the SAP employees, we can work with the personnel board to think through what vacation payouts and carryover should look like going forward. And obviously a lot of us are in the private sector. There is no such thing as payout of sick time, for example, in the private sector, at least that I'm aware of. And there usually are caps on how much you can carry on the books for vacation. So making sure we're not creating an undue liability for the town, because as some of you have seen with some of the recent retirements, there wasn't any last year, but I think a year ago, there's some massive payments that people are taking with them just because of how long this liability has accrued. And it's really a liability that was accrued many years ago. So we're not going to solve the problem tonight, but I guess Kathy would welcome the committee's thoughts on how we think about that and what the view is. We may not agree, right, going forward, but I think it needs to be looked at and figure out a plan with the personnel board of whether they're open to looking at, because ultimately they would sponsor an article on the SAP at town meeting. And should we change that, obviously work with the BOS because they do control the contracts, probably the 5 largest contracts of our department heads and also the unions going forward, just to think through, are we doing things the right way? That's kind of part one. And then part two is, I'm surprised there hasn't been any public conversation about these payouts and what I'll call the difference of application of how some department heads choose to take it, some didn't, even though they were all contractually allowed to. And I would like the BOS to consider for employees based on circumstances, whether those employees should at least be able to carry it over. I'm not necessarily advocating a payout at this point, because I think, that ship may have sailed, but I think it's disingenuous that some employees were paid out, some weren't, and there was no public discussion or vetting of it. So,
Hey, Jason, I may be coming in late to this, but I've completely missed this issue. Are you talking about that department heads put in for past due vacation time as a result of the pandemic?
No,
No? Okay.
no.
but I mean, they're not that far away. So first of all, we're going to talk about one specific issue that Jason identified that doesn't seem to be fair. But he's talking about individuals who have contracts and are part of a union contract, where those contracts basically allow people to elect to get paid for a week of vacation instead of taking the vacation.
Right.
So if you get 4 weeks, you say, okay, I'm going to take 3, but I want to be paid for a week. I'm not going to take the 4th week. And so several people, probably because of the pandemic, because they couldn't go anyplace, elected to do that. However, there's one case where we believe the person was encouraged not to do it, and therefore might have been treated a little bit unfairly. So we're going to talk about that one specifically in just a second. But the broad thing, as far as possibly being one of the things I've got listed for the work that we should plan on doing for fiscal year 21 besides the budget, is and advisories talked about this in the past. Should we look at the whole proposition as far as what our vacation carryover policy is for SAP, and at the same time encourage the board of selectmen to adopt that policy with the contracts that they have direct control over and the union contracts that they are part of negotiating, and include in that both the sick and the accrued vacation pay. You guys may recall 2-3 years ago when Joe Morrow retired, we had to do a reserve fund transfer because it was so big. So every year there is a warrant article that basically tries to predict what the cost of paying people out when they retire is going to be. So it can fluctuate wildly. Jason's right. In the for-profit world, you don't see this. You don't, if you're sick, you're sick. You take it. That's what it's for. It's not to carry over. And because the accrued vacation kept being such a big amount on people's balance sheets, that companies just started to not do that too. So they may let you carry over a little bit, but you don't get to carry over 10 years worth of vacation. So we thought it would be a good topic for us to address between now and December as far as what we think the appropriate policy is. We can do this. There's no state law that tells you what you have to do. Towns can do different things. So that's kind of the big picture. But then the specific issue that we want to discuss tonight is whether we want to make a suggestion to the BOS that in one case for fiscal year 20, they should consider making an exception to the normal policy. So Jason, you want to just talk about?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's more than one case based on at least the data that came back as part of my request. And I'm happy to share as granular as folks want to go, but there were 1, 2, 3 department heads that had hours lost. That just went poof. There were 2 department heads that had payouts, one of which also had hours lost. And then there were a significant amount of carryovers. And I was surprised, and you said Brian and Mark aren't on. I don't see them in the attendees, right?
Jason,
No.
before you go on,
They're not here.
what do you mean hours lost?
So John, let's just say you had 48 hours of vacation time on the books at the end of the year.
Yeah.
Based on the way the rules are working, that person just lost those hours and they don't have them carrying into FY21
Okay,
as an example.
thank you.
So I guess what I would recommend, Kathy, is that we encourage a discussion. In particular, I was looking at the fire chief who led us through a pandemic and had a department that had a prohibition on vacation time. And obviously, at least from what I understand, led by example, and also didn't take vacation time. And given he had only been here for a year, that's probably why it was the case. So I would, while I wouldn't necessarily encourage a payout at this point, given he made a decision, I don't know why he made the decision, that we were in extenuating circumstances, but we should at least consider whether there's recommendations for him or any of the others on this list that they should be able to carry them and use them in this year, or at least discuss it. That's really all I'm asking for at this point is a discussion. I was honestly surprised at the response I got, and I still have not been able to. I did ask, and bear with me from my accounting world, I just asked what the vacation accrual was on our balance sheet as of 6/30/2019, what our balance sheet looked like as of 6/30/2020. That doesn't exist yet, like a comparison, right? So if you think about what's the cost of this liability, I don't know, right? So I may be making something a little more than it really is, but I thought it was important because I was looking for kind of where these were in the budget. And that also is part of the reason why our free cash was a little lower than what Kathy had expected, just because you had some massive payouts. But I'm not arguing with the concept of the payout. I'm arguing with the concept of equity because I think it impacts employee morale moving forward as well. If you have different rules for different people.
Jason, I don't think there is an accrual for vacation pay, but I could be wrong. So why don't we do this? Why don't we ask Jason to circulate to advisory the list of the people who were impacted? Don't discuss it on email, just look at it. And then at the next meeting, we can decide whether we think it's appropriate to we have no executive authority, but we can certainly recommend to the BOS that they take another look at this.
Yeah, and Kathy, I would hope Mark or Brian would be on that discussion, because that's why I'm a little uneasy. Like, I would have probably put forward a motion if they were on, but I also think it's appropriate for them to discuss it.
So
and beyond.
I'll
to
make sure they
discuss it.
know that's going to be on the agenda, and then
Okay.
ask at least one of them to be there.
Okay.
Does that suit everyone? Is there anyone that objects to that one? I'm not going to ask for a formal motion. All we're doing is putting something on an agenda. Okay, so no objections.
I just want to say I still am catching up to trying to understand this issue. So I think what we're doing here is just, we're going to put it on the agenda for the next meeting, and there'll be a more detailed
With
discussion.
more
at that
details,
time.
yeah. What Jason's going to send to you will help clarify what he's talking about.
Okay, thank you.
It took me a while. It took me
Sorry.
having several conversations to really understand what the issue was, but there is an issue here.
And Kathy, what I'll offer to do is draft something for the committee to vote on if you'd like. And then obviously the committee can wordsmith or veto it down, but at least where I was trying to go with that. But again, subject to, I think it's important that Mark or Brian weigh in on it, just to make sure we have all our facts straight. I feel like I got the facts straight, but I think it's always important to get that validation.
Wasn't this covered either in my Southborough? I know I read about this. It's had news interest. Does anybody else see it?
I don't read
remember
my
seeing
Southborough
it.
every day, so I didn't see it there, but it doesn't mean
I don't
was
read it
there.
every
Anybody
day.
see it in
I'm
my
sorry.
Southborough?
I don't. But it was a huge issue in surrounding towns.
Yeah.
Like, unions filed grievances over how they were treated during the pandemic because of forced working conditions, which is what generated my question and curiosity around it, because I was surprised we didn't have it, and it seems like it was just handled kind of behind
Casually.
the scenes.
Jason is a volunteer fireman for Boxborough.
Yes,
Correct, Jason?
not volunteer, but I am.
Okay, well,
in
you are.
firefighters, yeah.
Okay. So he has the luxury of hearing things from another town's perspective, including, guys who are firemen and part of a union. So he certainly hears things that we might not hear. Okay, so that's fiscal year 20, unless anyone has a question. So we're going to carry over $1.4 million. Year 22, the budget that we're working on right now. So that's our starting point for fiscal year 22. Okay, fiscal year 21. The good news is the budget software that we discussed last year when we heard the MIS budget presentation was purchased. They are in the process of implementing that. There's going to be a capital budget module that's going to be, that's going to work with it, that's been approved by the Capital Planning Committee and purchased. So I'm hoping that this is going to help our budget process this year be much more efficient, so we're not handing spreadsheets back and forth all the time, but we will see. So I'm going to get more details on where they stand for the next meeting, but it's definitely being implemented. It's bought. Capital planning module has been bought also. So hopefully we're going to end up with a piece of software that's going to help us a lot with what we do. Okay, so now let's talk about fiscal year 20. Well, what I'm going to say now really is fiscal year 22, but it's really 21, 22. Okay, so property valuations for 1/1/20 are done. You probably read about that. That definitely was in my Southborough. The total value for Southborough as of 1/1/20 is $2.75 billion, which is up 4.8% from 1/1/19. The two classes of property, residential and commercial, industrial, and personal property, basically increased at about the same rate. Now within the CIP, big differences, but the total class increased at about the same rate as residential. So that did not affect our computation of the residential year-over-year tax increase. So that was good. Let's see. So the worry there is, so that's 1/1/20, pre-pandemic. 1/1/21 will be the next year, and there's probably going to be a substantial impact on commercial valuations as of 1/1/21, which means that we may end up with more of the real estate tax burden being borne by residences, which actually they're doing fine value-wise for now, for the next year. So we need to keep that in mind as we look at our budget and the long-term budget. There may be a shift between commercial and residential for at least a year or two, until the businesses can hopefully get back on track. But there's a lot of vacancies in Southborough right now. And you've got some businesses that are just, either cratering, teetering, or already closed. So we'll have to see. We don't know yet. Time will tell as far as that goes. All right, so that's all I've got to say about fiscal year 21. It's just too early. So far, so good. There's nothing big. The state has basically not reduced what they told us they were going to get yet, but the state's got huge budget problems. So they're still trying to figure out their plans. But for now, they have basically kept what they're going to give us as far as local aid at the same rate as the previous year. So at least so far, so good. But they've just got so many things to deal with that we'll see. Today, they said the T ridership is down so much, they're going to have to start shutting that down and making changes there. So we're not out of the woods as far as what the state is promising to give us. So we'll just have to keep abreast of that. So that's all I know about fiscal year 21 so far. So any questions on that one? Well, one more thing. So I'm not going to show you the revised spreadsheet for fiscal year 21 because I think they've made a mistake in it. Right now, Brian's showing a year-over-year tax increase of 1.63%, up from our 0.77%. I don't think he's right. I did the computation myself this afternoon, and I don't see how he gets up that far with only increasing the overlay by $200,000 and increasing the tax base by the increased growth. So I think he's wrong. I think it's closer to 1%. So I will show that to everybody once he and I have talked again and made sure that he's either right or wrong. So it's going to be a little bit more than what we showed the residents at the annual town meeting, but it shouldn't be much more. It still should be very reasonable by the time everything is said and done and tax bills get mailed in February or January. All right, so that's fiscal year 21. Okay, so fiscal year 22, which is what we're embarking on. So the plan right now is for advisory and board of selectmen to issue a joint set of instructions to the various departments. In the past, we haven't done it this way. The advisory's kind of done its own thing, and we asked departments directly for numbers, and board of selectmen did the same thing. So this year, we were going to try to put together, if we can agree, a basically one comprehensive set of instructions, mandates, parameters, et cetera, to give to the departments to work with. So we need to decide with us what we want to do. If we do, we need to decide what we want to have as far as those parameters. So I started that tonight, and I'm going to show that to you in a second. It's just a place to start as far as what we think would be appropriate for fiscal year 22. I've also almost finished a 10-year model for the town as far as the operating budget goes. The CPC has put together a 10-year capital plan. So the capital plan will fit nicely into the 10-year operating budget. So I'll have that to everybody by the middle of next week. I want Brian to look at it first to make sure he agrees with it. It's got a lot of flexibility in it, so you can play with it and see what changes and assumptions will do to you as far as that goes. But it should give us a pretty good roadmap as far as determining what we think we need to do for the next few years, including fiscal year 22. Okay. So any questions as far as that goes?
Does that show how much debt we may be able to take on?
Yeah.
Okay. I think that would be important to come back to capital too, right? As we think through some of the projects in the offing.
Yep. Yes, it does. Yes, it does. But it also lets that be a variable. You can change that too if you need to.
Okay.
All right. Okay, so let me screen share what I put together. So can people see that? Can everybody see that? It says proposed advisory budget process for fiscal year 22.
It's tiny. The text is tiny,
Is it really tiny?
really tiny on my computer.
Is it tiny for everybody? It's normal font on mine.
No, that's all right. Go ahead.
Well, I can read it. There's not much here, Judy. So can everybody else see this, or is it everybody?
I
It's
can see
normal
it.
font.
Can see it. It's fine.
Okay. Okay, so to me, the first question that I think should always be asked, but it's usually not, is what's our target for year-over-year tax increases? You know, we sometimes start the process late and it's too late to kind of have discussion. It's not this year. We've got time to do this. We've got lots of economic issues in this country, in the state, in the town. So do we want to start with and say, look, let's just look at the overall economics and let's start from there and basically do it from top down versus bottom up. So I want to start there and get people's opinion on, do we want to start with an overall goal as far as our year-over-year tax increase? Andrew Dennington.
I think we kind of have, even if it's not formal, we maybe kind of informally have done that, at least last year. We've had kind of certain numbers in mind about what numbers we shouldn't exceed. I was thinking that kind of a goal that I thought that also the Board of Selectmen would have is to, you know, think not so much about what's the year-over-year tax increase, but also what are there going to be any headcount increases this year?
We're definitely going to get, yep, we're definitely going to
Okay,
get to that as far as a specific parameter or requirement. But I would disagree slightly. What we've done in the past of tow departments, okay, we want to see a level service budget. We want to see a level funded budget. We want to see a 2% reduction budget. Advisory actually 1 year asked for all three of those. Claire will probably remember that. So that's what we've done versus saying, okay, let's say we want 2%. Let's fill in the things that we can't control, the debt service, the payment to Algonquin, things like that. Fill it in and then see what that leaves for the things that we have some control over. So we've never done that. We've always just started compiling the budget by saying, okay, give us a level service budget, give us a level funded budget, give us a 2% increase budget. So we've never said, okay, let's get everything set that we know we can't change. And then let's see what's left to get to a certain increase. So it's a different approach than what I've never been involved when we actually started and said we want a tax increase that looks like inflation, because that's what people's income is increasing by, that's what Social Security goes up by, or do we want something else?
Kathy, I've always found it helpful, not necessarily to adopt it, but to find out from the department heads what their budgets would look like in order to fund or provide full community services. In other words, if you were not restrained by 1 or 2 or 3%, what would your budget look like? Because then, in my very simple mind, then we can start talking about real items to bring that budget down. Now, I don't know if it's something that anyone else is interested in, but I've always looked at that as a good starting point.
And we have done that in the past, John, not regularly, but we have said, give us your wish list. So we could have, we could ask them to do 2 or 3 things. We could say, okay, this is what we need you to work with as far as budget goes. We need you to give us a level service budget, no matter what. Then second, we could say, we want a budget that basically puts in any new hours that you really think you need, require, and can justify. And then third, we could do the wish list. We've done wish lists with like Youth and Family Services. So we've had certain departments who said, okay, like library, like Council on Aging, come to us and tell us what you really want, if you really could do what you want to do. So we have looked at those budgets before, so we could certainly do that.
I guess, Kathy, I like John's idea, not from necessarily funding it in FY22, but it also gives you an indication of, at least if that department heads there the next 5 years, what they may come in front of us. Because we all know, right? Like they all came with a wish list. It's just not going to be feasible, right? So, but he also gives you foreshadowing of what they may be looking for in the coming years, so that you can help them chart a path towards that goal if they believe, if they're passionate about it. But I would think where you would want to start with where we're at is, and I don't know whether BOS voted on a level service or a level funding. I don't remember the terminology they used. But I would think you would want to understand what level service looks like and what level funding looks like. Because I think it's really important to the taxpayers to understand if they expect their taxes to stay the same, which I'm not saying that that's reality, but they expect it to stay the same, what would they lose in that? And I think it's really not a good idea to put out a percentage to a department. Because I think if we really drill into the details, some departments may need to go up 5 or 10%, right? Just talk about benefits maybe. We can't really control that that much unless you change what we're giving our employees. But you can control maybe some of your expenses, et cetera. And there may be some departments that are seeing less demand, and there may be some that are seeing more demand. So I think you kind of have to work through that magic. And I think one size doesn't fit all, especially given the size of some departments' budgets versus others. 2% on some people is a lot different than 2% on others.
To be clear, Jason, with the overall top-down approach, I'm not saying that that's what you give the departments. That's just what we know we're shooting toward and trying to figure out how to get there. So you wouldn't give the department a 2%.
But isn't that what happened during the whole COVID budget scenario? Is they said take 2% off?
Exactly.
Is my memory correct?
That's right.
Yeah, but you know something, it was a fluke. What they were really trying to do is the mandate that had gone back to Mark and Brian from the US was, okay, we want to see what it would take to get to a 0% year-over-year tax increase and a 2% year-over-year increase. At that point, we were like the high twos. And it just so happened that to get to the one that was close to 2%, it required cutting the budgets by 2%, but it was a coincidence. So that's why I got kind of confused what it meant by the 2%. So the advantage, I think too, the advantage of letting departments have a chance to tell us what they would really like to do if they had a chance to do it. I mean, they're so beat up at this point. I don't ever remember them ever being told not to do either a level service or level funded. My guess is BOS voted on a level service last night. That would be the more logical one. But they're just not used to being asked, well, if you could do something that you wanted to do, what would you do? So I actually think it's a healthy conversation to have, especially with some of the, I'm not sure, there's a couple of big ones, I'm not sure you want to say that too. But there are certain departments that I think you probably do want to ask that question, see what they say. Again, it may not be feasible in the short term, but it would give you an idea and give them, I think, some, you want to encourage people to take charge of the budget, right? It's their budget, take ownership of it, and try to find ways to be more efficient. So it does give, I think, people some more ownership in their budget when you listen to what they think should be done. So I think it's a healthy thing to do.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a good idea.
Okay. So no one has said yay or nay to my first thing, set the overall target. So we'll talk about that one separately. Okay, so we think that one of the things we want to ask for is a budget based on what they would like to do in the next 5 years or so.
Right.
Okay. Sound reasonable?
And encourage them to blue sky it.
Okay, so do that. I'm pretty sure the BOS has asked for a level service budget. So that could be the second one. And the third one is one that, and that's not going to include new hours. The third one could be one that is that budget but modified for new hours if they believe that is what they need.
Yeah, and I would say if they're identifying FTEs that they're looking to add, whether it be full or part-time, what's the potential revenue that's going to cover that? Because I think if we just add people without revenue, doesn't matter how dire the need is, they either need to find an FTE to remove elsewhere. I would like to see that too, right? I think we need to get out of the practice of looking at departments in isolation, which I know has been discussed before.
So I don't understand what you want there. So you're not asking for example, Youth and Family Services to come up with revenue, I assume.
Well, I'm asking them to partner with other departments to maybe see if there's an offset, right? If the department heads need to work together, not in isolation, right? And there
So-
may be some departments that can reduce hours because they feel like youth and family services may benefit, right? I know that's never going to happen. That's pie in the sky. But we can't just keep adding people, right? And I think it goes to, they look at the year over year cost, right? And they add the hours. We do some game with adding them at 9/1 or 1/1, just to cut the cost in year one. And everyone loses sight in year two and beyond, but that actually costs you, right? And then 30 years down the road, when that person retires, we're paying their pension until they pass away, right? So there's cost of every decision we make going forward with anyone greater than 19 and a half hours. I don't get as caught up on the less than 19 and a half hours, because just the overall cost of that long term is not as material. But it's when you cross that threshold, I think there's got to be a really good justification. So they need to understand that's as much as we want the pie in the sky to understand where they're going. There's significant limitation if you look at the 5-year outlook of our ability to actually accomplish that.
So I'm not sure I call it pie in the sky, although my word may be the same thing. I call it unrealistic. We tried that last year to get admins to be shared across departments, and it just really felt pretty flat for various reasons. So I think that to ask a department to somehow figure out how to fund any increased hours by reducing the cost elsewhere, finding a way to share, I think you ask the departments to probably spend way too much time on the budget process than what they have to spend. I don't think it's wrong when we meet with them for us to ask that question to see if they have a way that they might be able to be creative, but to require them to figure out how they were going to fund something, I think that's probably not realistic.
Require may
Somebody
not be
else-
the
so-
require may not be the right word. Encourage,
Okay.
maybe, because at least I'm only one vote, but that's how they're going to get my vote to support something, if there's an actual way in justification to pay for it, because we do have a limit.
Well, encourage sounds better than require or pie in the sky. So somebody else, come on, everybody else tune in here. So Andrew, what do you think? As far as what do we want to ask them for as far as budgets for fiscal year 22?
Okay, so I think that, like what we did last year, we had each department come in, and I think we did get kind of a idea from each department of, okay, if you weren't as constrained by budget considerations, what's kind of your wish list? I think we did get that.
Well, we asked them to do a narrative, you're right, a narrative
Yep.
of their budget.
So-
So
and
we can
that's-
certainly
that's
ask them
what
to
I-
do the narrative again.
Yep, and that's very useful, because from year to year, I definitely remember thinking that, for example, the senior center, I think they came with a lot of very, well-founded requests, and I don't feel good that we weren't able to really meet all their needs this year, but it's something that I keep in the back of my mind, thinking that looking for an opportunity in future years to help them out. So that's the benefit, I think, of getting the kind of the wish list budget. But my overall kind of view about this year is we're in a deep recession, and that we should be, I just don't think we are going to have the flexibility to do big things in fiscal year 22. And it was just a remarkable year last year, where we began this time in the summer, and we felt kind of optimistic about being able to help a lot of departments that were maybe looking for some additional staffing, and then absolutely everything changed. And then we had that crazy end of the budget where we did the 2% reduction. So I think now we know we're in a not good situation economically. So I think the goal is really to try to kind of keep things level until we get out of the pandemic, while we also continue to do some long-term planning. And I'm definitely mindful of how we had some discussion in the spring about possible operational overrides in 1 or 2 or 3 years. We don't want to have that happen. So that's why, my overall view here is trying to keep things under control this year.
So Mr. Rooney, I know that sometimes you think we're a little bit tough on departments. So chime in here.
No, I don't think we're tough on them, but I do think it is a very useful tool to understand not just their presented budget, but their projected budgets as well, by getting an understanding of what it is they would like, how, if they could operate the budget without these constraints, what would it look like? So I don't think I've heard any opposition from any of the other members about getting that.
No.
and
So do we want to
I
do
don't
that as a
oppose that at all.
narrative or as a budget? Do we want to just have them do the narrative again as far as what they would really like to do without quantifying it? Or do we really want to put it together as a budget?
I'm not really sure it makes a difference to me, but again, to Jason's point, if they're going to be adding FTEs, certainly that needs to be in the narrative.
Okay.
I thought that maybe like a one carryover thing from last year that I think that maybe we are thinking about is the IT issue, right? That's one where I think if I'm remembering right, we voted to give a half position, a half full-time employee position. But what we really thought was the best thing for the town long-term was to have an assistant to Tom LaFlamme. Other than that, I'm not really thinking of anything that is so pressing that it really is something that needs to be dealt with in fiscal year 2022, particularly where, on the public safety police aspect, we added significant staffing.
Yes, but we
Well-
also talked about youth and family and supporting them.
We added that too.
And I think we also need to understand, maybe this is off a little bit, what are the very real consequences of asking for cuts?
I'm not talking about that. I'm just
That's
thinking
when
about
youth
trying
and
to keep things
family-
stable. Just keep things where they are for fiscal year 2022.
See, I think one of the issues is going to be, you remember that, I don't know, January, February, BOS voted to, Mark Purple asked the BOS to take a position on if they were going to add as many people as we had on the table at that point, which was a lot more than got approved, to basically say, okay, but that's it. No more, we're not going to do this next year. We're going to have no new hours for fiscal year 22. So they took a position. That doesn't mean they can change their mind. It's not written in stone, but they did. But then what changed is because of the pandemic, some of those proposed ads were taken away, one policeman. So I
Police
guess
didn't
is we're
lose
going
one. They just got it delayed, and that
Yeah.
person's already been hired.
okay, but so there were others that were taking, they got their hours reduced, that I'm sure are going to come back and say, well, we were supposed to get it last year. We ended up having to take it away. Can we get it back? So I'm sure we're going to have discussions on hours before it's over with, regardless of what BOS said last year as far as no new hours. Okay, so I think I've got an idea of what to put together. So what I'm going to do between now and the next meeting, and I'll circulate this so you've got a chance to see it, is try to put together what I think I've heard as far as what we think should be in this memo to the department heads as far as what we want to see with their budget submissions. But I do want to add one thing that is important, I think, to at least to me. There's been a couple of cases that I know about, so there means it's probably more, where what we approved as a budget got changed. We weren't told about it. I don't know how it got changed. It just did. And so what I want to say to the departments as we meet with them, this is a budget that advisory has approved. This is what we're going to go to town meeting with. And so therefore, if anything changes, if we don't know about it, then we will not be approving it at town meeting. So I do want to make that clear to them so that they understand, and they may say, well, we told the finance committee should have told you. I will make sure that Brian Ballantyne, understands that too, but we really do have to understand that when we approve a budget, that is the budget that we've approved, and it doesn't get changed without our knowledge of it. So I do want that to be in there to make that statement up front, so no one's surprised about that. Okay, so the next one to think about as far as part of the memo, notifying the departments of what the budget process is going to look like. And this is one I believe the Board of Selectmen is also considering. Letting the departments know that once they've set their salary line, then there is nothing that can be moved in or out of that during the year. So if they end up losing a person, then they're going to end up with excess money in that salary line, and they can't use that excess money for other types of expenses. Now, that doesn't mean that with other types of expenses, they can't move those around, because no one's perfect. And so we've always allowed that. You continue to do that. But I don't think that they should be allowed to use excess money that's in the salary line for other things when they've got a surplus there. And that's happened a few times recently too. So some of these are from war stories. So I want to see what the committee thinks about having that as a requirement going forward. And it's my understanding that BOS is going to consider the same thing, that they're on the same, at least some of them are on the same page as far as that goes.
So they voted to create a policy last night on this issue, Kathy. I would take it, I think there's two items for consideration. I support the general concept. It would be good to understand these stories and also understand like a reconciliation from the first thing we see, regardless of whether it's their stretch budget, I'll call it, not my pie in the sky anymore. I'm moving on with my language. But their stretch budget, if that changes, there should be reconciliation that we see throughout the process of how it got down here and there. But I think there's two choices here, whether you just stick to salaries and expenses and you freeze those line items, or whether you go deeper in the budget. Because when I think about how people are reviewing budgets, they're actually looking at what's making up the budget, especially on the sublines. And I know it's not realistic. I manage budgets every day. A lot of you manage budgets every day. You will likely cross some of those, but just putting into practice at least some rigor of oversight around that, and maybe thresholds of, hey, if you need to transfer 5,000 from here to there, maybe that's just town administrator. If you need to transfer greater than 10,000, maybe that requires BOS and advisory, right? Like, I don't know what the right level of oversight is, but I think if people know that you're watching that micro detail, it changes behavior of how you spend a budget. So you could just do salaries and expenses, which I think is a great step. I would advocate we at least consider going even a step further than that and respect the line items that are presented to this committee, to BOS, and to town meeting.
Interesting. Anybody?
So hypothetically, the librarian says, I have excess money. There are certainly books I'd like to add, but more important would be to add 2 part-time people who will mean that my staff isn't working X number of 12 hours a day, 5 days a week. We're going to stop that?
No, Judy, but they've got to get approval. They can't do it unilaterally on their own, even the board of trustees. So if it's a budget that the town has oversight on, they've got to get it approved. So there, at least there is some independent review of it and approval of it.
So not the board of trustees of the library, but we have to approve it.
I think that's the way it should be. You may disagree because it's the library, but they do have their own board. So this budget process is hard because several departments have their own board that approves their budget first, but it's still coming out of the town coffers. So I say as long as it's part of the overall town budget, I think that it should be approved outside the department, including outside the individual boards. But I'm just one person.
I disagree. I just think that using the library is just because I understand how they operate. As an example, and I know that I'm making this up, that one person is working 100 jillion hours who's not paid on an hourly rate. And a little bit, rather than buy another book, it would be much more useful for that group to use it for salary. I don't know. I just think we're locking them in. I understand what you're trying to achieve, but sometimes
we're talking about more than one thing here. We're talking about basically saying you can't touch a salary line once it's been approved. Then we've gone on to with Jason's suggestion saying, well, I think we really should look at all line items to the extent that they exceed some threshold as far as a change goes. Well, I can tell you who doesn't have time to approve that is advisory. We don't have the bandwidth to approve something like that. So I'd have to be some, administrative thing to be done. We can certainly recommend it, but we can't do that. We'll never have time to do that kind of thing, get that much in the weeds.
Kathy, that goes to the materiality, right? Like 50,000 is still moving between budgets on some of these things, right? And I think that's where, you set some parameters, and maybe it's your town administrator and he has to just furnish a report to BOS and advisory. Maybe we don't vote on it, but at least it increases the transparency of what's going on, so that when you get to year end, right, we're now 3 months after fiscal year 20 ended, and we're looking at things saying, well, what happened, right? And is free cash the right number? Or could we have saved even more?
I know you didn't mean what you said, so I just want to clarify. So we're not talking about moving money between budgets. We're talking about moving money between lines on a budget. We do.
Yes, within a department.
Budgets, yeah. I don't know, Jason. I just don't think we've got the bandwidth to do this. I know right now that the Finance Committee does not do this. Maybe they get a phone call every once in a while and say, do you care if I do this? But they really don't monitor this. And so therefore, we're asking them to do something that they don't do already. So I don't know. We can talk about it, but I just don't think we're set up to do this. So where is Tim Martell? Tim, would you please weigh in here?
I don't have a strong opinion, Kathy. It's kind of sort of my sense. I kind of agree with Andrew, but again, I don't have a strong opinion.
Okay, I'm going to take what I've heard tonight and put it together in a document, and then I'm going to circulate it, and then we will try to finalize it next time, and hopefully end up with the majority of us thinking that it makes sense. Again, we're trying to come up with the document that's going to be disseminated to the department heads so they know what the process is for fiscal year 22.
What if our document conflicts with BOS? How are you going to resolve that?
Well, it has in the past, Tim, just so you know. Advisory in the past has kind of just gone their own way. I know Claire's probably dying to say something at this point, but we really didn't know what BOS was doing until the very end, and weren't even that curious, to be perfectly frank. So we had our own. We contacted the departments directly ourselves. We told them what we wanted. They came in front of us. Now. It also was a time that I don't think that the BOS paid as much attention to the details as advisory did. I will say that they're paying much more attention to details today than they used to. Mr. Rennie may disagree with that, but that's my recollection. But no, advisory just we asked departments directly, and there was some grumbling about it because they got asked for different things by the two groups. So I just thought it just seems to me that it makes sense if we can do this to have one document that goes out and say, this is what we want, this is what we are charging this year, this is what we need you to do, rather than going our separate ways. So let's at least get that decided. Do we think we want to try to put together a joint document with BOS as far as a request from the departments, or do we want to do this on our own and let the BOS do what they want to do on their own? So let's at least get that part, because that's kind of what we're proposing here. So if we don't agree with that, then we need to go down a different path here. Okay,
why don't we do what we want to do and invite the BOS to join us?
Well, we could do that. We could put this together, finalize it next week, or excuse me, the next meeting, which is we want to talk about a second. It should be in 2 weeks, and to say this is what we would like to do this year. This is what we're going to do. Would you like to be part of this? Do you want to do you have any suggestions to change this? We could do that, but we got to get this out pretty soon because they need to get started on this.
Right.
Because March will be here before we know it. If we have Zoom meetings all the way through, it's going to slow things down a little bit too, I think. Okay, so Andrew Dennington, should we put together our document with our plans to disseminate it ourselves? Or do you think we should try to work with BOS to put together one document?
Well, I'd like to, I think I'm cautiously optimistic that we could maybe have a document that would not be all that different from what the Board of Selectmen would be looking for. You know, in your document there, you're looking for the departments to submit to us proposed budgets would have no new staff hours. That seems like something that the Board of Selectmen is also asking departments for, based on what you said. And I know that this is not captured in here, but the idea of getting narratives from each department about, you know, pretend that we're not in fiscal year 2022 in the economic climate we're in. Long term, tell us freely what resources you think you need to do to deliver the highest quality services. And those are the combination of the two things that I'm looking for, and I don't see how it's really all that controversial to ask for those two things.
Okay. Mr. Rooney?
Yeah, I think it's beneficial to have just one set of directives going out to the department heads. But to the extent that we can't agree on anything, and I suspect what we may not agree on is the stretch budget, as Jason has termed it. That is something that I am going to want, even if the BOS says they don't want it.
Well, it's not like they'll disagree with it. They just may not want it. So it's just that's something we want. They don't. So I don't think they would have an issue with it. But, you know, we've got the right to ask for it.
Yeah, I mean, I do think, you know, to the extent we can come up with one voice to the department heads, that would be preferable.
Okay, so that's what I'm going to shoot for. I think I've got majority to think that. And then if we've got to go our separate ways, we'll do it. I don't think we will. I think that they will agree that we should put together one directive. Okay, so that's going to be our goal. And with the job that 2 weeks from tonight, we need to basically finalize it, approve it, vote on it so that we can get it to BOS so that they can then make any suggested changes so we get it out to the department heads soon.
Hey, Kathy, quick question. We've been going about 2.5 hours. Do you have any idea how much longer you think we're going to go? I have something
I do. There's let's see. I'd already planned on postponing a couple things, so
I just
I
have
want to do. There's one thing that's really important. Let me do the one thing that's important for everybody to know, and then let's set the calendar, and then we'll call it a night, and we'll pick it back up. How does that sound?
I'm not sure I got everything. I just let you know I have a hard stop at 8:30.
Okay, so that's 30 minutes. So we will stop at 8:30. So we're going to do one thing that is really important for everybody to hear as far as something that is happening. And then we'll set our calendar and then we'll call it a night and pick it back up. Okay. All right. So the thing that I really want to make sure that everybody knows as far as something that's really important that's going on. There's been a subcommittee appointed. Okay, so Capital Planning Committee has basically done a whole lot of work. They've got a proposed capital plan for fiscal year 21-22. But they've gotten to the point that the next big thing that needs to happen capital-wise is to decide whether we're going to close a school or not, because there's so many decisions that impacts. So you really can't get those other decisions to the critical path is decide about the school. So the Board of Selectmen, Jason, I assume they approved this last night?
Yes.
Okay, so Board of Selectmen has basically appointed a subcommittee that consists of 2 capital planning committee members and 1 member of the K-8 school committee to basically reopen the question of whether we can close a school. The 3 people on the committee are Jason, myself, and Katura Martin from the school committee. The intent is to move pretty fast. The first thing we're probably going to do is to update the study that was done a few years ago where the decision was made not to close a school, even though the study showed that we could close a school.
Kathy, was that the committee that you were on, I was on, and it was with Linda Murdoch as well?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So John, you remember how many people were on it, right?
Oh, quite a few, about
Yeah.
12. 14.
So 3 people are going to try to update that really quickly. We would have some help. And then basically report back to see whether we think the demographics will support Pleasant School, because all these other decisions we're trying to make, what to do with the senior center, what to do with South Union, all revolve around whether we're going to close the school or not. So that's kind of a really important thing that is going on. We're going to meet, the first meeting is October 1st, and then we're going to try to really, really, really work fast to get this done, because it's going to inform a whole lot of other decisions once that's done. School committee, John actually seems to be pretty receptive. Roger Challenge seems to be really receptive to this. So there's no one saying don't do this. Obviously, the decision hasn't been made, but there seems to be a lot of open-mindedness about the decision.
I mean, it's such a big decision.
It is, isn't it?
I don't know how your committee intends on moving forward, but I would suggest that you may want to have at least 1 or 2 public invite meetings, because there's a lot of people out there who have a lot of strong feelings one way or the other.
So,
I don't disagree with that.
yeah, so, and John, the intent is really to get the data right now and come back to school committee and capital planning and then advisory and BOS on what that data shows. Then I think that's where the public really weighs in of, you know, there's obviously a whole decision tree that you can think about of how this could go, right? But I think what we're trying to validate in the initial phases, right, in calendar year 20, so in the next 3 months, is should we continue to pursue it? Or is it kind of, I'll call it dead on arrival because of some fact that we uncover in the enrollment data? And then it creates this whole decision tree of, okay, well, if you are going to consolidate, where are you going to consolidate? How are you going to consolidate, et cetera? But I really just echo one thing Kathy said, and I had just moved to town when this last happened, is there's a lot of consensus building and willing to work towards the right answer that I think is really important, both not only with the administration, but the school committee, et cetera. And I think their willingness to jointly partner on this and not take it on themselves or, you know, hire someone to do it, right? I think it's just really important and goes towards the overall mission. I think we're trending towards the right direction. I don't know what the answer is. If I knew what the answer is, we obviously wouldn't be spending all the time, but I think it's really a positive sign that people are open-minded, because sometimes that shuts things down before they even start.
I think it's great that you're doing this. I don't know how I feel about this issue, but you know, if your committee could produce something like what John Butler just produced about the transfer station, I mean, that was an extremely high quality, very helpful presentation. If we could get something like that, that could help move the discussion along. And I think it's good that we're thinking about a big picture item like this, because it's not just a budget issue the town faces, but also real estate, right?
Yep.
As you said, the fact that, you know, we just don't have enough real estate to expand in areas where we might want to expand. This is something that can help solve that problem.
No pressure, Jason and Kathy, to fill Butler's shoes.
Yeah.
I know, I was going to say that's a pretty high bar.
Set that bar high, set it
Yeah.
high. But Andrew, I would say, and see what Mr. Rooney says, the report that was done 2013, I thought was well-written, well-researched. I mean, that committee had a lot of really good, talented people on it. So I thought it was a very good report. Ironically, it concluded we could close the school back then, but back then, if you close the school, it would have had to have been Neary, because Woodward still, we owed so much money on it, we would have lost the state reimbursement, which we couldn't afford to do. So we would
Yeah,
have
hopefully
had to close Neary.
Hopefully it's a good starting point as well, Kathy. I mean, I wouldn't just try to recreate that wheel.
You would or would
That's-
not?
I would not.
Yeah.
In other words, there's a lot of data in there which you may want to refresh, but again, like you said, it was pretty comprehensive in its scope.
Well, you know, I agree. So John, that one went as far as saying, well, these were the operating expenses that we would have saved if we closed the school. We're not going there because we're going to use the building even if we close the school. So there's really no point in doing that. You're not going to save the operating expenses of the building because it's going to be used. We were going to sell a building back then. But I will say this, I don't read my Southborough regularly, but I did see a post that Al Hamilton did. He was not on that committee, but he did apparently go back and look at the report, compared it to the actual demographics now, and the numbers he put in that posting, I don't think are right. So I'm hoping he's wrong as far as what he said really happened. I think the demographics, we ended up with more kids than what the demographics projected, but not a lot more. And then of course we got Park Central to deal with. So lots to be determined. So thank you, Andrew, for setting that bar really high. We'll see what we can do. Okay, but I wanted to make sure I got that tonight because this is a big thing. We've got the new public safety building. We're kind of on a little bit of a roll in the town as far as big stuff. The road project is starting to look really good. We've got the public safety building off and running. So hopefully, we can do a good job with this part too. You're right. There's going to be a lot of emotion in this. Besides just the data, there will be emotion in this. Remember the big argument over the two high schools versus one. So I don't know if this one will be quite as controversial as that was, but there will be a lot of emotional arguments on this, regardless of what the data says. All right, so there's that. Okay, so it's 8:09. So let's talk about calendar and see how this works for everybody. So starting 2 weeks from tonight is 10/7. So what does 10/7, 10/21, 11/4, 11/18, 12/2, and 12/16 sound like? None of those are holidays. None of those are around holidays. I think we'll need every one of those before the end of the year. So it's every other week starting tonight. Same time, same place.
The only question I would have, Kathy, is the 10/7. Are we going to have much to discuss?
Yes.
In that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we've got to talk about, we've got lots of things to discuss. There are things that I'm cutting off this agenda, so we'll start with there. You're going to have the budget model to look at. We've got to finalize the proposal to the departments for what we need from them. So yes, we've got a full agenda for 2 weeks from now. Tonight.
Does anyone else feel like we just ended the budget discussion?
Yes, because it was June. Of course we do.
Okay.
Yes. But it's true. We didn't have a March town meeting. It was June. So yes.
Dates work for me, Kathy. I would just say if there are any meetings you're seeing as shorter, 5:30 is just not a great time.
Yeah.
But
so you would like to start.
I'm also weary of where we would be if we had started at 7 right now. So
you're saying start later, Jason?
Yeah, I'm not saying every meeting, but like if you think you have a longer agenda, I'm flexible to start earlier. But if we have like a 1 hour, 1.5 hour type agenda, it's a lot easier to start at 7-ish.
I know what Judy's going to say. So, we used to start at 7:30, right? Because people had to come from Boston, whatever. And by the time we got done, it'd be 11 and we'd be falling on our face. So I'm happy to push it back to 6 if that would help.
Yeah, I would ask no earlier than 6 moving forward.
Okay. Jason, does 6 help you at all?
Better than 5:30. So I'll take any inch I can get.
I said no later than 6, Kathy, as opposed to actually no earlier than 6, as opposed to 6.
Yeah, so that's why. So what about 6:30?
That's good for me.
Jason, does that help?
That's a good compromise if everyone else is open to
That's
it.
good for me.
As long as we don't run till midnight.
Hey, Judy, you get to sleep late these days.
Yeah, but I'll fall asleep on the meeting.
Okay. Well, 6:30 is better than 7:30. So why don't we do 6:30 unless someone says no? And it looks like we're okay with 6:30 from what I can tell.
And Kathy, you had all those meetings right in front of you. Is there a chance you could just flip those dates out to us via email? So we can come in?
Yes, I will.
Thank you.
Okay, so everybody agrees 6:30 every other Wednesday starting tonight.
And maybe we can commit to an end time, right? That we're not going to go beyond that unless there's some major issue that we're trying to resolve.
Jason, I can't talk as fast as you. Okay, so we will certainly try to commit to an end date of no later than 8:30.
That's good.
Okay.
It'll never work, but it's good.
Well, Judy, if you don't try, it certainly won't,
Okay.
Okay, so we're going to call it a night, and I will include everything we didn't get to tonight on the agenda for next time. I do want to say one thing before we go, which is we have a new grandmother on the committee. Judy has a brand new little granddaughter.
I do.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
She's very cute.
She's fabulous. What can I say?
Judy has retired officially from teaching, so she's got time to be grandmother.
That's right.
So Claire, it's nice to see your face tonight. Okay. All right, motion to adjourn.
I move.
Thank
we
you,
adjourn.
Kathy.
You're welcome. Okay, Judy's motion second.
Second.
All in favor, roll call.
Bud's eye.
Cook, aye. Andrew,
Aye.
Tim,
Martell, aye.
sorry, Jason,
Malinowski, aye.
Mr. Rooney.
Rooney, aye.
Okay, so Claire is 6-0. All right, guys, more to come. Thank you. Nice to see everybody.
Thank you.